Committee Room 29. Signed. 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 Committee Room 29. Sound. 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 Committee Room 29, signed. 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 Committee Room 29. 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 Signed. Committee Room 29, Sound. 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 Committee Room 29, Sound.
We can talk about it afterwards.
Okay, that is us now commenced in session. So just need to advise members that the committee meeting will be recorded and broadcast throughout Parliament buildings and online. And there's nobody in the public gallery at present, but advise those in the public gallery they're welcome to use mobile devices as long as they're in airplane mode and all devices are muted. You can connect to the assembly Wi-Fi. Password details are available on the gallery rules. It's not permitted to take photographs or record any of the meeting. So that takes us to item 1 on the agenda, and that is apologies. And I have apologies in from Cara Hunter and Danny Baker. I think that's everybody else present apart from that. So moving on to item 2 on the agenda, chairperson's business shouldn't take up too much time. The first item on that is just to draw members to attention to a record of the informal meeting we held with Unite the Union Registered Childminders branch on the 19th of March. That's at page 5. I would propose that we forward the briefing papers provided by Unite to both the Department of Education and Department of Health, as I think the issues they really wanted to raise were in relation to the minimum standards and those ratios, and I think it would be good to get the Health Department's feedback on that. Our members agreed that we seek both those departments' views on that those briefing papers. Members agreed? Item 2.2 was the informal meeting held with the JNC-TUS Joint Secretaries in Education, and that was held yesterday on the 9th of April. That's at page 3 of table papers. And I would just highlight there was quite a lot of material covered in that briefing that I think is relevant to the evidence session with the EA today in relation to workforce, non-teaching workforce, and particularly in the SEN space as well. So it would just be useful to have made sure you've familiarised yourself with that briefing. And I think it would be worth drawing out. We did discuss the pay and grading review in some detail in the session yesterday, and it's welcome that as we've had noticed that has been approved at Department of Finance, and we now obviously need to keep a close eye on that process as it progresses, certainly with budget setting as well. The only other item I just want to add at this item of the agenda is I'm conscious that quite a while back we did agree that we would take a bit of a closer look at RSE in the committee, and we haven't really picked that up in our work as yet. But I think just to draw members' attention to the fact that is now noted in the forward work plan that has been added to tabled papers, and I'm hoping with the agenda today we'll have a bit more of an opportunity to speak to that in more detail. I would like to begin some consideration around what the terms of reference of that mini inquiry might be, and maybe some timelines around how we start progressing that, but we can come to that later in the agenda. So moving on to item 3, and that is matters arising, of which there are none. So we just move on to item 4, draft minutes. Refer members to the draft minutes of the committee meeting of the 20th of March. That's on page 10 of your meeting packs, and I would just be seeking members' agreement that the minutes are a complete and accurate record of proceedings. Is this agreed?
Agreed.
I got a copy to sign there. That's great. So that moves us on to item 5 on the agenda, and it's our first oral briefing of the committee session today, and that is with the Department of Education, and that is specifically for a SEN policy update. I would refer members to the briefing paper from the committee clerk at page 18, and then at page 6 of your table papers there is a briefing paper provided by the department as well. So if we're ready, we can bring the witnesses through. Right, okay, so they're not in attendance at the moment. Okay, and I am assuming that no one from the EA, we're a bit too early for that as well. So no, that's fine. On that basis, I would propose we move on to item 7, which is correspondence, and we'll get that cleared at this stage. So if members are happy just to jump to that item on the agenda, I would refer you to, it's item 7, and it's pages 48 to 143, where we have 21 items under correspondence, and I also would refer members to the table papers where further items were tabled for your reference. So I want to just, as sort of we've been doing in previous weeks, go through any items where I think there's likely to be a committee decision or a steer required, and members can raise any others that I haven't identified, and the remainder will then be for noting. So item 7.3, that's a response from the Minister of Education, providing an update on the development and implementation of guidance on the use of restraint and seclusion in educational settings. I would like to propose that we consider that on our forward work plan. I think it's been an issue that has come up in a number of evidence sessions, and I would be slightly concerned that we are maybe drifting into a position where we're going to get some statutory guidance through from the department without the committee having had any opportunity to hear from the department in detail, or indeed from other stakeholders. So if we can note that for forward work plan, if members are agreed.
Agreed.
Item 7.4, it's an update from the DALO following the concerns that were raised during our briefing session with the Children's Commissioner, and I would just want to propose that we share that response with the Children's Commissioner at this stage. Are members agreed?
Agreed.
7.6, that's a response from the DALO regarding funding cuts to Sentinus, and I would propose that we forward that on to the organisation. Are members agreed?
Agreed.
Item 7.7, that's correspondence from the DALO, and that is sharing the Healthy Habits pilot post-project evaluation, which was very welcome to see coming through. It's a fairly substantial document, and I'm going to confess I haven't read it in full detail, but I have had the opportunity to have a brief look at it. Based on that, unless any other members have any other views at this stage, I would want to propose that the committee writes to the Minister highlighting the success of the project and urging him to focus on delivering provision in primary schools as a matter of urgency. And I would also want to highlight that the summary of the pilot does seem to note that even with funding and resource going in, demand far outstrips supply, and that really there is an urgent need for a policy intervention in this space. Are members agreed if we write in those terms?
Yeah.
Agreed.
Okay. Item 7.8, that is a response from the EA to our correspondence regarding St Malachy's Youth Centre. I would propose that we forward that on to St Malachy's and then also to note the content of it for when we have the EA in providing a briefing specifically on youth services. Are members agreed?
Agreed.
Item 7.9, this is a request from the Committee on Economy seeking a joint meeting with themselves and officials from both DE and DFE on careers guidance, and they are proposing that for the 29th of May 2024, and I think we can see from other correspondence that permission has been granted by the Speaker to allow that session, if agreed, to take place in the Assembly plenary chamber. So I would propose that I respond to the Chair of the Economy Committee confirming that we are agreed to having a joint meeting, and that then subsequent to that I can liaise with the Chair around timings, logistics, particularly around which committee chair chairs the meeting and who takes Deputy Chair to take that forward. Are members agreed?
Agreed.
Item 7.13, correspondence from Young Enterprise, requesting to brief the committee on the work that they currently undertake. I would propose that we invite them to an informal briefing. I'm sure other members have had engagement with them. I've certainly had some really positive engagements with Young Enterprise at a number of their events, and I think it would be good to hear from them. Are members agreed?
Agreed.
Items 7.14 and 7.23, correspondence from the History Teachers Association of Northern Ireland, also requesting an opportunity to brief the committee, and again I would be content to invite them to an informal briefing session of the committee. Are members agreed?
Agreed.
7.15, correspondence from the Youth Assembly, and that was stating their interest in getting involved in a youth engagement event, and also requesting that the committee meet with members of the Youth Assembly for lunch prior to one of our committee sessions. So I would propose that we write back to them and thank them for their interest in ongoing engagement, and confirm that we're very happy to facilitate that, and that we'll be in touch with potential dates over the next number of weeks. Members agreed?
Agreed.
Item 7.16, request from NICMA, Northern Ireland Childminders Association, to brief the committee on a number of issues affecting the childminding sector. I would propose that we acknowledge and thank NICMA for their request, and then we do, and we can consider this at forward work planning if needed, but that we invite them to brief us at a formal sitting of the committee when we are next receiving evidence on the early learning and childcare strategy to try and align those issues. Members agreed?
Agreed.
Item 7.17, Diverse Youth NI. They have shared their proposals and recommendations on educational policy and children's services. It's really as a follow-on from our session that we had with youth stakeholders. So I would propose that we share those recommendations with the department. Our members agreed?
Agreed.
And other than that, are members content that we dispose of the correspondence as per the summary note at page 19 of tabled papers? Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Okay. That is us through. And were we ready for the department? If you're happy to bring them through, that would be great. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I'll just let you get settled there. Okay, so good afternoon, and I would just begin by referring members to the briefing paper from the committee clerk, and that's at page 18 of your papers, and then also from the paper submitted by the department at page 6 of your tabled papers. So good afternoon and welcome. It's lovely to have you all here at committee again. So if I could just formally welcome Janice Scallon, Director of Inclusion at the department, Lorraine Brown, Head of Special Education, Early Years and Pupil Support in the department, Julie McBride, Head of Special Education Review Team in the department, and Brenda Shearer, Head of Special Education and Inclusion Policy at the department. So we would be asking you to bring a presentation to us of up to 10 minutes, and then we will move into questions from members. So it's over to you at this stage.
Thank you, Chair. Could just take the opportunity to thank the committee for the opportunity to attend today to brief you on the work of my directorate. I'm about to repeat what you've just said, Chair. I have three very small teams, an inclusion directorate. Special education review team is headed by Julie McBride to my left, and they lead on the end-to-end review of special educational needs and implementation on the SEND framework. Special Education Early Years and Pupil Support Team is led by Lorraine Brown to my left, who leads on SEN placements, early intervention in the early years and pupil support services, and the Special Education and Inclusion Policy Team headed by Brenda Shearer to Julie's right, who leads on current SEN policy and the development of a new inclusion policy for the department. The department's vision, as you'll already know, is that every child is happy, learning and succeeding, and this is no different, nor should it be, for our children and young people with special educational needs and or disability. But we recognise that over recent years, effective delivery of SEND policy has been hindered by significant challenges, leading to a lack of confidence in the system and its ability to respond to the needs of children and young people and their parents. The existing system was established at a time when the pupil population profile was very different in terms of both the numbers of children and young people presenting with SEND and the nature of their needs. There's no doubt that our education landscape has changed significantly, especially in recent years, and the trends we're seeing today are similar to those being experienced across other regions. Since 2017-18, which was the academic year following the initial Northern Ireland Audit Office SEN report, the number of children with statements of special educational needs has risen by 51%, alongside an increase of 25% in children attending our special schools. Over that same time period, expenditure to provide support for children and young people who have or may have SEND has increased from 254 million in 17-18 to 490 million in 22-23, with a forecasted expenditure of 544 million for 23-24. Following the initial Northern Ireland Audit Office SEN report in 2017, there have been several other scrutiny reports, and most recently the Independent Review of Education, which have considered the changing profile of our population and made a wide range of recommendations for transformation for children and young people with SEN across the wider education system. These reports have pointed to the need for a more responsive system of early intervention that places children at the centre and meets their needs at the earliest possible opportunity. It's clear from the reports that parents, carers, teaching and wider staff often don't have confidence that children's needs will be met early enough, and an assessment and subsequent statement of special educational needs is often perceived as the only way of securing the additional supports that children need to aid their learning. It's also clear that the intent outlined within the 1998 Code of Practice for Identification and Assessment of SEN in relation to the graduated response, and I'm happy to take questions on that later, has not been supported by sufficient investment at school level to build the confidence and capacity of our teachers and support staff. The experience of the last few years regarding the placement of children with SEN also clearly demonstrates the need for better and longer term planning in line with projected need to ensure that children can access their education in an appropriate setting alongside their peers and be assured of the necessary support to meet their needs within that setting. There's therefore a strong case for systemic reform, driven by a changing educational landscape, detailed evidence of the range of shortcomings in the system, and ultimately the urgent need to improve the experiences and outcomes of our children and young people with SEND. The Department's response to this has been the commencement of the end-to-end review of special educational needs. This is a joint Department of Education and Education Authority transformation programme that will identify the changes needed and drive reform right across the education system. The review will bring forward an implementation plan which will include actions on how we speak about, how we plan for and how we deliver services to support our children and young people with SEND. The plan will focus on a framework that will ensure children and young people with SEND get the right support from the right people at the right time and in the right place. And while committee has endorsed this mantra, I thought it would be helpful to explain what is meant by the four broad aims. In terms of right support, that means high quality, efficient and effective support that is evidence informed, and evidence-based. By right people, we mean confident and highly skilled teaching and support staff who can access additional support to complement and enhance their practice in the classroom. By right time, we mean effective early identification of needs and early intervention to meet those needs. And by right place, we mean appropriate and timely placements that effectively meet the needs of every child and provide an appropriate learning environment. While it's clear there's a significant amount of change required across the system, and we currently sit on over 200 recommendations, most of which fall under those 4 rights that I've just mentioned, the Department is committed to taking forward early action as this review progresses that will result in change for those children and young people within the system today. Alongside plans for investment in the longer term, this focus on the here and now will require significant investment and also political support. And I'm delighted that this issue has had cross-party support both within the Assembly and at the Executive, and I want to thank the Committee for being so supportive in this space to date and for prioritising our children with special educational needs. And that concludes my opening statement. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Janice, and I think it is fair to say that the committee has, we've referenced this on a number of occasions. We made it very clear from the outset that SEN was key priority for us and that we would maintain a focus on that for the duration of this mandate. So it is not a sort of opening issue that we want to give a brief look at. It is something that we will be focusing on for the whole of the mandate. And it is good to have both yourselves and the EA in today so that we can look at these issues in a little bit more detail. I wanted just to ask about one of the things that sort of stood out for me in your briefing paper was that the figure of 114% increase in spend over the last number of years on SEN. I mean that's a substantial increase in spend, and we've heard a lot from the Minister that he feels he needs more resource and more money on this. Can I ask what has that additional resource been spent on, and why has it not been making the difference that we need it to?
Well, we've got, as I've said, I mean the forecast expenditure for 23-24 not finalised yet is 544 million. We've had an exponential increase in the number of children coming through our system with special educational needs. So because the system is demand-led, then we have to prioritise that and move the money accordingly, and that's what the current bill is. In terms of, I want to just set down some figures around comparisons, if that's okay, because I know there have been questions previously around comparisons with other jurisdictions. The first thing I would say is I don't think it's fair to make a like-for-like comparison between Northern Ireland and other regions because we operate different systems, and I think the figure in England was something equating to 20,000 per capita for children with SEN. That's based on those children that have high additional needs with SEN, and it also includes health costs. Our costs don't. So the figure here, the latest figure that I have, is that our per capita rate, albeit a crude rate, I wouldn't use that across the board because some of our children have very minimal needs and some have a real multiplicity of need. So there will be significant variation in the distribution of spend for each child, but our average is sitting at around 19,000 per child.
So if I have understood that correctly, that 114% increase in spend, that really relates to dealing with increased demand. It doesn't relate to anything being put in place to alter the system in any way. It's been just about dealing with demand as it comes through.
That's about keeping the system steady and providing the services that we need to provide for each of the children in accordance with the needs either that are outlined in their statement or those children that are on the SEN register.
So in that same period of time then, where we were looking at that 114% increase in spend, what amount of additional resource had been put into actually addressing the systemic issues?
I might have to come back to you with the detail on that, if that's okay. I'm happy to come back to you.
I think for me the concern is just that we appear to be entirely on a crisis footing at every stage through this process, and I feel we are there again. We were in a crisis setting again, and I think the figures around the additional places that are required, the additional classes that need to be created are really, really concerning. So on that basis, I mean, can you give us any sense of how many children you anticipate at this stage will be without a placement in September?
In terms of placements,
Yeah,
I
in terms of
can. So
placements.
the latest figures that I have around SEND placements, and I will ask if Lorraine wants to come in with any detail in case there's anything I've missed. So look, in the interest of being open and transparent, we've said repeatedly that the position remains challenging for September 24. The current plan and assumptions are that there's a need for an additional 1,000 places. So just to put that in context, the number of children that will require a new placement or a change of placement is around 7,000 children. So 6,000 of those children will be placed in accordance with their needs, but there's a need for an additional 1,000 places to meet the pressures. What that equates to then is 66 new special school classes and around 94 new specialist provisions in mainstream. So I don't want to use the word crisis here. It is challenging, but I don't want to give the impression that no work has been done in this space. There has been an extensive amount of work done in this space. So the Education Authority have written out to every school. And just to give a sense of the capacity in our system, there are around 30,000 available places that exist in our mainstream schools. So the Education Authority have written out to every single school. They have got a response from a low number of schools and have been contacting, to date, the latest figures I have, around 291 schools have been contacted individually that are in areas of pressure. Of those, around 134 have said no to creating specialist provision. 80 have said yes, and that is being progressed actively within the Education Authority. And the remaining around 54 schools haven't been prescriptive either way. In terms of the specialist provisions that exist, and that's 6% of our children in Northern Ireland are educated in a specialist provision. The vast majority of children with special educational needs are educated in a mainstream class in a mainstream school, with around 10% educated in special schools. But specialist provisions in mainstream constitute around 6%. Around 3,174 children are educated in a specialist provision in a mainstream school. So that's quite a small percentage of the overall cohort of children and the overall cohort of children with special educational needs. 100% of the children in specialist provision in mainstream schools are educated in 20% of our schools. So the work that's being done currently is to create more capacity across the entire system. It's really important that our schools join us in this space and are supported to do so. I understand we've been on visits to specialist provisions in mainstream schools. I've gone out with the team to talk to those who have specialist provisions. I appreciate that for some it's working incredibly well, and when you see it in practice, you can see how it's completely life-changing for those children. For some of the schools, it was a rocky road to get to that point, but largely down to logistics of actually getting the accommodation in place. So when we say getting ahead of need and getting ahead in advance of need, each place may require accommodation, and that takes time. So putting all of that together, that's the challenge that we face. We're still in the process, and the Education Authority, I'm sure we'll talk about this in more detail later, but we're still in the process of contacting schools individually. And for on record, I am more than happy to speak to any individual school who wants to work in this space with us, because a specialist provision for a child can be life-changing for them. Simply putting them in a calmer environment that allows us to reduce and remove the barriers to their education that a busy classroom brings, and allowing them to access the curriculum.
I have no doubt, and I've visited in my own constituency settings where that is working really well, but I am also aware of settings where there have been real problems, and the fact that the lack of support has been really evident. I think other members are going to, I'm sure, have questions on SPIM specifically, so I will leave that for other members. I would just want to really finish with, and I don't want to have to be asking this question. How do we avoid being in this position next year? Because this feels like an annual cycle, and it's entirely unacceptable that our children with special educational needs are are dealt with in this way, and I'm not suggesting that there has been any lack of good intent to try and sort the situation out, but it feels to me that the planning has still not been good enough, and I really would like to just get some clarity. How do we avoid being in this position, in this room, in a year's time, having the same conversation?
Right. So I think we have an opportunity. I sit on the Area Planning Strategic Group. I'm currently meeting with each of the managing authorities and special and sectoral support bodies to talk to them specifically about the work that they're doing with the schools that they represent to encourage more schools to step into this space for the future. Now, not necessarily for September 24, but for September 25, 26 and beyond. But we do have a critical opportunity now in terms of area planning to make sure that the next operational plan, which is due to be released in June, prioritises special educational needs, but that it also plans in line with projected need. The way the process has worked with the previous operational plan is that, and I do need to get into process here, because it is a statutory process for children with special educational needs. So for those children, I think I spoke about this at the previous committee I attended, for children in P7 moving to Year 8 who have a statement, each of those children needs to go through a transitional review. So that's an individual meeting about that child with all of the adults involved with that child and all of the professional bodies. If that requires a change in placement, which all of them will. So it'll be a change in placement from primary school to post-primary school, either in mainstream or in a specialist provision or transitioning into a special school. That requires an amendment to that child's statement. It has to go back to the Education Authority to be reviewed by educational psychology to determine the placement for that child. Once that placement has been determined, there'll either be a place or there won't be a place. So naming the school on the statement is difficult if there's no provision in place. That's why we need our entire school system to step into this place so that there are places for those children and they can be named quickly. It's a tripartite decision for each child with the parents, the parents, the school involved and the Education Authority. So the educational psychologist decides what the appropriate placement is. That then goes to the school. The school can say yes or no.
We do understand that process.
Yeah.
I suppose that what I'm not hearing is what do we do with that process to ensure it's working, because it doesn't feel like it is.
Under the end-to-end review, we have a work stream on the statementing process, which includes the annual review process, trying to look at how we can streamline, within the legislation that we've got, trying to streamline that process to make it better. But I have to go back to area planning. If we can put the places in place in advance and in line with the projected need, then we won't see that bottleneck. Once a provision is decided, the place should be there for the child, and that's where the operational...
Through area planning this year, is that the intention?
That's where the operational plan is the biggest opportunity that we have to make sure that instead of waiting until the placement need has been identified, to go to area planning local groups and they then work to put placements in place, that actually we completely flip that and the area planning local groups are aware of the projections, get ahead of the numbers, get the places there so that the process then doesn't become the problem.
We will watch this space with interest. I'm going to hand over to the Deputy Chair here, and I'm going to say, given the time we're on, we probably do need to be moving through our meetings a bit more rapidly than we have, so I'm going to say 7 minutes for each contribution here.
Okay, thanks.
Just interview.
Thanks, John.
And I'll bring you in.
And the last time you were in with Lindsay Farrell, I asked Lindsay what was the difference between the multidisciplinary teams and the local integrated teams, and she said it was only a matter of language. Mm-hmm. That's not factually accurate, sure it's not.
My understanding, Pat, is, and I've checked this with the Education Authority and we've checked through all the previous paperwork on this, a multidisciplinary team is understood out there as having all different professionals, including health, education and anyone else that might be involved. That's the true meaning of a multidisciplinary team. When the local integrated teams were set up, they were referred to as multidisciplinary teams. But what the project actually is looking at those individual education authority pupil support services, consolidating those services and wrapping those services, happy to elaborate on that, wrapping those services around the child from an education perspective. So the name was changed to local integrated teams to avoid any misapprehension out there that they would be involving speech and language, allied health professionals, occupational therapy, physiotherapy. There's similar work being done by allied health professionals on consolidating their model of provision and working out what the best model of provision is. And that's acknowledged by our health colleagues. That AHP services were designed with a totally different system that we had years ago.
You see, you're losing me there, Janice, because you clearly defined what a multidisciplinary team is and should be. It involves educationalists and involves people from a health background. Now, what is it exactly that we're getting?
The local integrated teams?
Yeah.
So,
what exactly is it? Who's
Okay.
going to be involved in it?
So at the minute, there are 7 separate and distinct EA pupil support services that are provided to children. And the way that a child gets access to one or more of those pupil support services is through a referral system that has to come in through an educational psychologist and then is channelled out to each one of those teams. So if you have a child that is autistic, has a literacy difficulty and potentially might need behaviour support, that's 3 referrals for that, 3 separate referrals for that child. Come to educational psychology, 3 separate assessments. Each one then goes to the appropriate team. It may end up on a waiting list, depending on what the volume of children needing that particular support service are, or they may get seen straight away. Behaviour support will go out to the child. Education, the autism intervention service will go out to the child, and the literacy support service will go out to the child separately. So you may have 3 different people engaging with that child on the same day, on different days, weeks apart, with 3 separate care plans for that child that aren't integrated, that don't actually mesh together to provide the best support for that child. The parent, the school, the teacher, the classroom assistant has to cope with those 3 separate care plans and work out how best to provide for that child. 3 separate streams of advice. You can imagine the administration. So the local integrated teams are actually, 1, removing the gateway for educational psychology, so a school can refer directly into a regional, as I understand it, Julie, right, a regional hub, and not through an educational psychologist. The school can make the decision, and they won't have to do those 3 separate referrals. It will be 1 child-centred referral that goes into a regional hub, and I was about to say multidisciplinary, an integrated team will then make the decision how to wrap those 3 services around that child, around the school, and provide a consolidated plan for the intervention with that child that's not unwieldy. So it's child-centred as opposed to service-centred.
It requires collaboration between health and education.
It will do, yes, absolutely.
And what role are health playing in this?
They have their separate and distinct, very similar scenario. They have their separate and distinct allied health professional services. So that could be speech and language, occupational therapy, and physiotherapy. So they are doing a similar exercise in health to look at their model of provision, to work out how to better wrap their services around a child. And we have a joint health education oversight group that will bring these 2 things together to ensure that when the time comes, while they're being developed in parallel, we're represented on health groups, health are represented on education groups.
When do we expect those to be up and running?
I can't put an exact, on the local integrated team, September 24. I can't put a time frame on the health. I don't have a date for that.
Okay, I'll move on anyway. In terms of, you said you've written, just a couple of quick ones. You say you've written out to every school, or every school has been written to.
The education
some
body
have responded in the negative. Others have said they're willing to take special needs. And many grammar schools have said they'll take children with special needs.
Oh, I'd have to check that for you. I do have the information from the Education Authority, but not with me today. I know, Pat, there are a number. I have a meeting set up with the Governing Bodies Association, but I know that there are a number of grammar schools that have come forward. I don't have the exact number, and I don't want to
Could you give me that
mislead
and give me what percentage it is of
I
grammar schools?
absolutely
And just
can, yes.
finally, the independent review suggested a send first approach in terms of placements. Has the EA or the department considered that?
Absolutely. So this is part of, so the Ipsos review recommended that children shouldn't be supernumerary, as did the independent review of education, and in fact I'm just out of a meeting there now about that very thing. So we've been considering this for quite some time in the department, and we are at a point where we're firming up recommendations to bring through our top management group. Both myself as Director of Inclusion, Capital Side are involved, and the area planning, the Director of Sustainable Schools, will be bringing recommendations to the Minister on that.
So we can see if the EA can help with the data on the grammar schools as well when they're in. Okay, Kate, you were in next.
Thank you, Chair. Janice, I want to pick up on something you said about it not being a crisis. For 1,000 children who are not going to have a place, it is a crisis. And I'm very concerned about the ping-pong attitude between the department and the EA. We saw it with the pay and grading review. I mean, I don't even know who's to blame for that. And now it feels like it's being put on the schools. And if I were a parent and I helped so many of them last summer, I would be so concerned, and I wouldn't be hearing anything to be optimistic about right now. And what I am hearing from parents is there needs to be more communication. So what are you doing around that? And the end-to-end review, I mean, the dates for that, the timeline for that, and how are you communicating with the people who are going to be impacted by this and who we are going to be representing in a couple of months' time? I'm very concerned about it, and it is a crisis. For 1,000 children, it is a crisis.
Okay. No, the 1,000 places. So it's not 1,000 children, it's 1,000 places. So that's based on an assumption of projections coming forward. That's not individual children who are currently without a place. So we just need to be clear on that. Okay. In terms of what I said around a crisis, it's when I think about things being a crisis, it's nearly like an unknown. We do know that these pressures are here. We are working to resolve the pressures. I know for each individual child that can be catastrophic for them, and it is worrying, and it is very anxiety for the parents that are involved. Of course, it's a state of anxiety for them, wondering what the future will hold. But I can assure those parents and assure the committee that work is ongoing every day between my team in the department and those in the Education Authority working in this space. And we do have to work with our schools, because that's where the places are and that's where the places need to be. We can write down words on a page, we can put a plan on a page, but if we don't ultimately physically create spaces in our schools, then they won't be there. So I'm not blaming anyone. I'm saying that it's important that everyone pulls in the same direction here. So I'm simply laying out the facts in terms of the number of schools that have come into the space with us and are willing to support our children with special educational needs, and those that haven't. But we continue to work in that space. In terms of the end-to-end review, we're currently in the engagement phase. Part of that, actually, SEND Reform NI are working with us to have engagement directly with parents on that very thing, on the placements issue. So we are communicating widely with our stakeholders and our schools. All of the 12 work streams in the end-to-end review are in their engagement phase at the moment, and I don't know, Julie, if any of the staff want to elaborate on the engagement that you've had with people. Julie, do you want to?
Yeah, I mean, you're right, trying to contact all the parents of children is quite difficult, so we do try to use different methods through Facebook, through even the departmental websites, through our own working groups that we have, and through all the various departments. We are trying to pull together a newsletter, if you like, which will go out to all schools, and we will put on all the parent groups and websites, again on the department websites. And on that is a code that the parents can actually click on, and it tells them about the work streams. It gives a definition of what that work stream covers, and then the parents can indicate if they want to be involved, and we have done that.
Sorry, and I should probably make it clear, it's not just how you're communicating with them, it's the level of detail within that, because the parents have been asked to put all their faith in this process, so they need to know that something is going to deliver within it. So it's not just the means but it's the level of detail within
You're absolutely right, and one of the things that is just closed is a transition survey. So for children transitioning from education to adulthood, we have just completed the survey on that. And funny, if I was just talking yesterday, we need now to put something out to say to the parents who contributed, thanks very much, here's where we are and here's our plan of moving forward, so they know that they're being listened to. And then we will obviously publish the results from that survey finding. So that's one way. You're absolutely right. There's no point in us going out and just asking for information if parents know that we're not doing anything with it, you know. So that communication needs to continue ongoing.
Okay, thank you. And then just the last point I'd like to make, Chair, is in relation to the allied health professionals, which Pat has already touched on. I have been to Surlas and Mancap, two amazing centres in my constituency, and it is shocking to go into one classroom, which is right next door to the other classroom, and the one classroom they have access to the speech and language therapist and everything they need, and you go into the next classroom and they have to go back out into the community, often to see the people who are looking after them there. So I think we do need, it's welcome that there is work happening, we need to have a date, and maybe the next time we have a conversation, or you'll be able to update us when we can have a date of when this will be addressed, because it's ridiculous.
Yeah, if I can come in on that, Kate, I mean, that's something we're totally alive to that, and that's why the Joint Health Education Oversight Forum has been set up, because we are aware that health are trying to transform their model, education are trying to transform their model of pupil support. The whole point here is the pupils are supported wherever they are, and that's not just the case. And we fund actually the provisions in Mancap and Solus and two others actually non-statutory provisions, and they are going incredibly well, providing an excellent service to children. But yes, that is the case. We have seen that. So the children in the ordinary Mancap provision are accessing all of those allied health professionals, and the children in the provision that we have there can't access them and have to go out into the community. That's the same in a lot of our in a lot of our specialist provisions in mainstream school as well, where the children have to go out into the community, and the same as those children who require speech and language or other allied health professional services that are in a mainstream class. So they may be in the appropriate educational provision, but they may not be able to access allied health professional provision in school, and they have to go out to clinic or they have to go out to community. So it's absolutely something that we're looking at in that space, that children can be provided service wherever they are, and if that's in school, then that's where it needs to be provided. But there is a significant transformation of that allied health professional model that needs to happen to enable that to happen.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
David, you're next.
Thanks, Chair. I don't plan to take up the full 7 minutes because actually the two themes that I was coming to, Pat has covered already. But just to probably on the back of what Pat did said, to reinforce, I guess, the idea, and I think we're in agreement in this, is that I still, after hearing it raised a few times at committee, I'm not convinced as to why there is the need, or why it is that these two sort of teams are being individually sort of put in place. And why that I worry, and happy to hear why it's not the case, but I worry that for a child-centred approach, you would wrap around both those aspects of care around the child at the same time, and it would work much better if you. I don't see why you would cultivate those separately. I understand that there's an overseeing group, and hopefully that helps knit it together, but it feels more departmental and staff centred to develop it in such a way where it's perhaps more comfortable for the siloed sort of operation that we've been used to at times to operate in that way, and develop their own teams with, you know, the ecosystem within they're more familiar, I guess. And I just, perhaps you can speak to why that it may be the case, or why it's preferable to develop it in that sort of separate way, because I still do think, and I think that's what Pat was trying to say, that actually it makes much more sense if we have two departments developing very similar sort of wraparound care for a child. Why would you not collaborate more fulsomely and put that together at the same time? And I'll just ask the same question, or I'll ask the question I was going to come to. I know Danny usually raises around the profile of those schools, and hopefully when you're given that to Pat, you can pass it on to us all in terms of the schools and who's saying yes and who's saying no in that sense. But perhaps anecdotally even, you can give us an idea if there has been feedback as to what reasons the schools that are saying no are saying no. Is it just a flat no, that's not what we want, thank you very much? Or is it concerns that they are raising around support? We understand that schools need to be supported in order to make this happen, but there also needs to be an understanding across the system that things are not perfect at the minute, the resource is not everything that we want it to be, and therefore everyone does have to pull together and try to shoulder some of the weight as well. So.
Yeah, so can I come to that one first?
Yes,
and then I'll come
sure.
back and say about the local integrated teams. So look, the overall aim when we look at the long-term transformation of the special educational needs system is that children's needs will be met whether they have a statement or not, and that if we are identifying needs early enough and meeting those needs, whatever those needs are, whether they're speech and language, whether they're sensory services, whether they're literacy services, that those needs are met at the earliest possible opportunity, and that people don't need to go as far as getting a statement. There'll always be children that will need to have a legal document that outlines their educational and non-educational needs, and they're separate in the statement as it currently stands. But you're absolutely correct. You know, as I've already said, you know, all of the children educated in our specialist provisions in mainstream, that's 20% of our schools. So the schools that have come forward and said no, when I'm getting this information on a regular basis, I meet with my counterpart in the Education Authority every Monday morning, and it's a variety of reasons, and it is anecdotal, so I don't want to seem pejorative on any schools, but yes, nervousness around we've never done this before. What does it entail? What support will we get? What is a specialist provision, actually, is something that has been said. So a complete no knowledge of what this actually is. So in that regard, the communication needs to be much, much better about what this is. Previous experience of having set up a unit way back in the day was what they were called. I mean, specialist provisions have been around for decades. They're not a new phenomenon. We've just had a lot more of them in recent years because that's the profile of the children that's coming through. And I've said before, our whole system needs to flex to meet the profile of our children. Children shouldn't be expected to fit our system. That's just the wrong way around. But yes, previous experience of having set up provisions and not getting the right support, not having enough flexibility around what that provision looks like, the staffing that's in it, the people, the adults that are in there, not getting outside additional support, not feeling confident and capable to meet the needs of the children. And some schools, in fairness, that have said, no, it's more a case of, well, we don't have accommodation. We can't actually, we're absolutely full. We can't put a specialist provision unless we physically build it. So there's varying reasons. Some, I have to be perfectly honest, have just said they're just not interested. And that's where I think we need to get more involved. And I have spoken regularly with colleagues in Education Authority and publicly that I would be more than willing to meet with every school or any school in this space. We need to put the package together more succinctly. Now, the Education Authority did send out with their letter what a specialist provision is, what support you can expect to receive when you set this up. But some schools have stepped into the space, some haven't, due to largely logistical factors and previous experience.
Also, there's no one. Obviously, there's what's optimal and what's not, but there's full and there's full, because I've been to special school in my constituency where the storage cupboards have been made into they are literally packed to the brim, and I suspect that there are other schools that are, you know, full in terms of they've filled their capacity, but I suspect have much greater facilities and space than the special school that I would be referring to, who are largely in temporary sort of modular buildings and using every inch of space that they can. And it's if there is pressure on some schools to operate above what is optimal for them, certainly that pressure shouldn't be applied just to one or those schools that are willing, but actually everyone should be expected to bear some of the weight. But of course, with reference to whether that school is best fitted to meet the needs of that child relative to what's available. And then just on that sort of the...
You've used your time.
Oh, it's more asking for the answer to the question that they asked around the why we
The local integration.
doing that separately. Is there a reason, even briefly?
I mean, we do merge those. I mean, yes, it is two separate departments, but we do communicate regularly with our counterparts in health, and all of our allied health professionals, PHA folks, are represented on our education groups right throughout the governance structures that are there, right up to the SEN Strategic Oversight Group has the grade 3 in the Department of Health on there. We have grade 5 on the SEN, the DEEA SEN Programme Board, and likewise we sit on their groups. So there is constant collaboration in this space. We do operate in separate structures. We have one education authority and a range of other ALBs in the department. Health have different health trusts, and they have structures within those trusts. So it's important that they get their consolidation right, and that we get our consolidation right with a view to collaborating together. While it's being done in parallel, it's not being done separately. We're still collaborating very much with a view to these things being able to be dovetailed at the point at which they're ready. But I think it's important for each of those health services and education services to get their own models in place that are going to wrap around a child with a view then to dovetailing them in the future. To do that now, I think, would be really unwieldy.
Okay.
If I could just add there, I think there's the issue of data. It does keep coming up when you speak to the EA that they feel that they don't get the data they need from the health trusts in adequate time for children who are on the health service radar very, very early on. So again, I think, the next time perhaps that you are before committee, or again, if we can get something, from yourselves, what is maybe not to cover right now, but to follow up, because
I think it may be an issue. I think it may be an issue, to be honest, of presentation as much as anything else, because I think I'm willing, to believe that there's nuances that we're less across and less aware of. The people working within departments will be more aware of. Absolutely. But just as a committee, and especially as people new to this committee, it's trying to get an understanding of why that maybe doesn't look the way we would think it should. So it's just...
In terms of the data piece, so health, as I said, my counterpart in the Department of Health is represented on the DEEA SEN Programme Board. And at the last meeting, we had a full presentation on those very things, all of those structures in health, so that we can understand that better and the confines within which they work. But one of the good actions to come out of that, we did discuss data at length at that meeting. So there is a meeting coming up with our BSO, Business Services Organisation, statisticians. So we've already made contact, and we want to sit down now to look to see, I can't remember the exact name of the team, but the BSO statisticians, we're due to meet with them ourselves in education to look at the data that they have and how we can utilise that and how we can share that. And then again, we've always signalled up the need for that very, very early years, the children that we don't know, getting that very early years data to us at the earliest point, so that again that helps the planning in advance.
It's really critical for getting ahead
Absolutely.
of this, because it felt last year that there were a lot of surprises suddenly of in terms of the demand for places in preschool settings, and that just should not be the case. Those children surely must have been known to health, and it's hard, I think, for us to understand how that.
Some of them will be, Chair. Some of those children will be known to health. A lot of them won't be known to health. And I think in the last couple of years, we have to think about the COVID babies. So the COVID babies are in our schools now, and we're coming into preschool last year, and we're coming into P1 last year. So a lot of those children, because of the COVID period, didn't see a health visitor, didn't see an allied health professional. So a lot of those children would not have been known to health. So I just really do need to clarify that point. But moving forward, that's all back in training, or should be back in training now. Health visiting, allied health professionals, children being referred by GPs. That wasn't the case during the COVID period. So that's a reason for the spike that we saw last year, to be fair.
Robbie?
Okay, I'm going to start off and be unusually controversial, if you don't mind. we have in the existing orders and acts the presumption of mainstream, and I think that's wrong. I think that isn't child-focused. I don't think it's child-centred. I don't think in that presumption of mainstream that if the presumption of mainstream is before the child presents, then it can affect the choices that a parent and the team around it make in regard to the right school for that child. And I think that adds into our P1 issue every year, because what we are faced with as MLAs and as public representatives is the disconnect between parents and EA and probably yourselves in terms of which school is best for that child. This is supposed to get the best setting for the child. And I'm concerned at the moment now with what the Minister has said and what's been presented at times. We seem to be moving, even before the end-to-end review is complete, towards the SPIMS and mainstream and that being the best place for these children. And I think it's an inefficiency. I'm not saying I have this absolutely bottomed out, but I also think it's a bit of an inefficiency. We don't have enough child psychologists, we don't have enough speech and language therapists, we don't have enough occupational therapists to go around multiple sites. So if we don't have, how can we ever join it together if we don't have the workforce? And if the very start of the journey for the child, we have the added difficulty where it's a presumption of mainstream before we start, kind of. So given that, I'm also going to sort of challenge some of the figures here. 1,000 pupils this year looking a placement P1, but that is around 1,000
places required across the board.
7,000 out of 7,000 places, which is around 19%, which is what is a known. How is that an additional challenge this year if it's a known? If that is around the same figure as what we have in school, which is 19% according to figures, how is that presenting any more greater difficulty this year than any other year? It sounds very much to me like the same figure.
Well, those children, first of all, that 19% that you're referring to, they're statement of children. Mm-hmm. So the 19% that you refer to across the whole cohort aren't statemented. That's all of the children on the same register.
28% are the children who present either statemented or not. Yeah.
7% in our system are statemented.
Okay.
19% are on the SEN register.
Yes, on the SEN register, yes. So and that'll be the same.
And the vast majority of those children, 85% of those children, are in mainstream schools. So when we talk about a presumption of mainstream, 85% of our children with special educational needs, whether they have a statement or not, are in mainstream schools. Mm-hmm. Only 7% of our pupil cohort has a statement of special educational needs. We get focused on the statement, which isn't because it's the behaviours of the child and the outcomes for the child that's important. So the statement is almost a misnomer, I think, in some ways, although some of the support follows a statement. In some cases, the perception is that the statement is the only route to get support. And that has evolved over the years because of what I said earlier. If a child's needs are not being met, and many children, bearing in mind 85% of our children with special educational needs are educated in a mainstream school, their needs are being met without the need for
my main
a
point
statement.
then is presumption of mainstream. What has been? When was the last time that was assessed as in the best interests of the child? As in terms of the starting point for an assessment, and we're looking at what is the best. When was the last time it was looked at and to measure the outcomes for our children who have?
It's not a default position. The policy is a presumption of mainstream. That is the terminology, right? We have a presumption of mainstream in terms of all of our children, regardless of special educational need and or disability, have the right to be educated in a mainstream school alongside their peers and in their community, like other children.
They also have the right for special school?
The statement is what decides what the appropriate placement is for those children. So the presumption is there that all children, from an inclusion point of view, that all children have the right to be educated with their peers, alongside their peers, in a mainstream school with equal opportunity to the curriculum and to the learning that all other children that don't have special educational needs get by default. But the statementing process is what decides ultimately what the appropriate placement is for that child. And who decides that is based on all of the evidences that go into the statement. That includes contribution from the parents, contribution from any medical professionals involved with the child or any other professionals involved with the child, and the educational psychology professionals in the education authority. So when it comes to making a decision, all of that information is assessed by the educational psychologist, and that can include consultant paediatricians, speech and language therapists, physiotherapists, whoever's involved with that child puts all of the advices into that statement. And if you've seen a statement of special educational needs, it can run into quite a bundle. So the educational psychologist will assess all of that and decide what the child's needs are. They will also have their own educational based assessments to see what the child's potential capabilities are and decide whether that should be a mainstream school, a specialist provision in a mainstream school, or a special school. Once that decision's made,
my time's limited.
Yes.
If you don't mind,
Okay,
I'm going to
sorry.
jump in. I need to jump
So,
in. I need to jump in
yeah.
because you're as good as a minister here, just filling up my time.
just
Oh,
trying.
no, we only get 7 minutes.
Sorry.
No, I'm not shouting at you. I just want to get more out of you, if that's okay. So we've heard a lot about the SPIMS and inclusion. That's fine. I absolutely get that. But we also have a greater complexity of need.
We do.
So in the best interest of a child, I'm going to go back to that. Are we confident that today in 2024 this is still fit for purpose? That if we have a greater complexity of need, that the needs of the child would be picked up without the additional pressures that schools are facing? And I know we need the multifaceted approach. I get that, but I've heard very little today in regard to what we're going to do to increase the capacity in special school placements. Because if there's a greater complexity of need, then what does that look like for special schools in terms of the additional classes and new builds? And finally, just Chair, and the last one then is we know how many, we know where they are. Mm-hmm. What's the outcomes for those kids? How are we capturing the outcomes for those children who go through our education system in either sector in terms of their transfer into either work, further education, higher education, or the facility where they can just, they get the best support that they can have?
Okay. So in
Need to
terms,
be
Thank
a
you.
quick answer,
Sorry,
but I think the questions are, we haven't really covered special schools, so I think it is
okay,
important
so
to
I
draw
did
that
say
out.
earlier on in the 1,000 places that are needed, that requires 66 new special school classes and 94 new specialist provisions in mainstream. So that's covered. That 1,000 places include special schools. And in terms of solutions, I know Lorraine has the figures on them there. In terms of the solutions that we're working through so far, if I'm right, do you want to come in on that, Lorraine?
Yeah, so the latest update from the EA is that there are solutions for 43 of those 66 special school classes and 46 of the 94 SPIMs. There's still a bit of work to do in establishing the balance, but that's where we are with that. And maybe also just to say, in terms of future planning, the operational plan 2 and the area planning piece that Janice referred to earlier, that will include the special school provision and enhancement of the special school estate where required.
Thank you, Chair.
Do you want, sorry, outcomes? Do you want
Yeah,
so,
yes.
so under the end-to-end review, we have an outcomes work stream, and we're developing an outcomes framework. So this is about, at the minute, we're sitting on over 300 indicators on how we would measure outcomes for children with special educational needs. It's taken me in my happy place, but ultimately we need to whittle that down to get the right measures. I'm very concerned around we measure what matters rather than what gets measured gets done. So the outcomes framework is working its way through, and we're having a series of turning the curve workshops. Happy to come back and elaborate on that, with each of the appropriate professionals involved in that particular area, whether it's right support, whether it's right time, whether it's right place, to make sure that we can measure moving forward how we look at the outcomes for children with special education.
And just on that one, just in
Yeah,
terms
I
of
think we'll need to-
gathering the voice of the young people that
That to a close
have
here,
either
Robert.
been through that process or in that process at the moment, are we doing that?
I didn't get the first
Gathering
bit.
the voice of the young people to ensure that their voice is
Absolutely.
taken into it, that they're either in that,
Absolutely.
coming towards
yes.
it, yeah.
At every step.
Okay,
Yes.
I'm going to move on to
Thank you.
Cheryl here
Thank you very
with
much.
the next contributor.
Thank you, Sharon. Thanks very much for the update. I will be quick. Just in terms of children that cannot attend school or physically or emotionally can't attend school, I suppose what action is the department taking to bring those children back and to provide them a suitable environment so they feel emotionally ready for education? Another question would be in terms of training for staff, whether it be support staff or for teachers. How do you feel that the department at this stage is actually getting teachers equipped for training for special educational needs, or even teachers within a mainstream setting who are not necessarily teaching children with SEN but we all know that there is children within those classes, and those teachers aren't, they're not trained to that level. So I suppose that would be how we would deal with that going forward.
Okay, so there's another work stream in the end-to-end review around workforce development. But some of the things that we've been doing very recently, I have a meeting coming up. I'll deal with initial teacher education first, I think. No, actually, what I'll say is all teachers are teachers of children with special educational needs, because 1 in 5 of our children have special educational needs. They're in every single classroom and always have been. They're there. So a lot of our teachers are already teaching in that space. But I have a meeting coming up with the higher education institutes to talk about what the offer currently is in our universities for initial teacher education, to make sure that what's in there is reflective of what we need. I can't really say any more about that right now because I haven't had the meeting yet. We also have, in terms of continuing professional development for our teaching staff, our learning leaders strategy. And that's something that I think it's out there. It needs to be better articulated. It needs to be better understood amongst our staff. In terms of our support staff then, our classroom assistants and those supporting our children, they don't have a continuing professional development arm, but that's something through the workforce development piece that we're looking at in terms of what knowledge do they come in with. Some of our classroom assistants have degree qualifications in early years development, for example. Some are extremely well qualified and know what they're doing. Others don't necessarily have that support. So it's making that support available. And I'm just back from a meeting at Middletown yesterday where we know that there's a lot of training materials there, certainly around autism, that the centre have made available and are more than willing to make available in that space. So we're very alive to the initial teacher education and the continuing professional development of all of our staff. But I would say it's all teachers are teachers of children with special educational needs.
Just in terms of the higher level education and university, obviously degrees and placements, do they require students to undertake a placement in special educational needs, or is that a choice?
It's an option.
An option. That's something I suppose I think would be key. I think we are in a situation now where this is the norm, and we need to make sure that every teacher is not only trained but confident and willing to, and they all are, but have that confidence there that they can do this. So I think from that level there, from a training perspective, I think that is key, that we can put that into the education as a mandatory element. But thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of things. One thing I just would like some clarity on, and again, it's probably more for myself, just being new to the committee. What's the difference between 1,000 places and 1,000 children? Would be the first thing. The other thing is, and it's just picking up on something that Cheryl said, this Our Learning Leaders strategy. Does that include, and I think Janice, I asked you the last time around the Team Teach specifically, special schools are getting, the staff and that are getting this training. School a couple of miles down the road with the children that technically should be in that special school but are in this special supervision are not getting that training. Come this September, will those, and I'm speaking on one school in particular who are coming to me, really on their knees with this. Will they get that come September? In terms of, and I was reading through the notes there's 8 areas that have been identified that are really under pressure, and you did mention that earlier, Janice. What specifically is being done in that area? And again, I know I see in it, don't know if they're in list of order of just how under pressure they are, but Dan Patrick is listed in that, and I know from last year where we were sitting and the parents that were coming in through my office door and other colleagues' doors as well. Is there something that's being done specifically? I know you might be talking to schools individually and things like that, but it clearly doesn't seem to be working. The uptake's not there. Is there something specific there? And then really quickly, just you mentioned on the early years piece as well. We're talking about early intervention, and that's something that's been talked about quite a lot in a lot of different areas around, saying, is there something specifically done in the early years? Again, I get that data might not be there, knowing what's coming through, but we do know that there's an upward trend here. We do know that there's more children coming into the system. Is there something being done in terms of the early years strategy to try and combat this?
And take those
Sorry,
order,
Kathy,
Kathy.
there.
Okay, early years.
But
maybe
5
not
minutes
that
to
time.
cover all of that. so-
Okay, okay, in terms of team teach, I'll maybe cover that one first, Kathy. So, yes, I have gone back, when I went back into the department, to look at team teach specifically, right, rather than look at the learning leader strategy, which is sitting there as it is. I went back. So I've gone back to Education Authority colleagues, and actually my own colleagues in the department, in, I can't remember the name of that director, the Raisley team, who are looking after emotional health and wellbeing, restraint and seclusion and all of those things. So that kind of sits with them. So we have had some further information from Team Teach. I've asked specifically that very thing. Do all schools have access to Team Teach training? So there are different tiers of Team Teach training, and I am informed that all mainstream schools and specialist provisions have access to level 1 Team Teach training. So I have gone back to try and look to see, is there opportunity for access to further tiers of Team Teach training, and I've asked the Team Teach people themselves to come back and tell me whether that's appropriate or not. So that's as much information as I have right now, and I only got that response last night from Team Teach.
Well, I have a response from that's maybe just a few days ago
Mm-hmm.
that contradicts that they're not able to get the team teach training, that there's a development, there's something in the pipeline that's been
Level
developed.
1 Team Teach, as opposed to the higher tier, which is about restrictive practices, about ground holds and things,
Yeah.
but they get the level 1 Team Teach training. I've had that confirmed.
Okay, well I'll maybe go back again and just question that if that's the case, because as far as this school is concerned, they've been told to go to the special school that's up the road and ask them to train them.
Do they have they may have a Team Teach tutor in the special school, and that's where it would come from, because Team Teach there's a Team Teach tutor who then trains on to others.
That's not the case. They just have been trained in team teach.
Could you maybe write to me separately about that, Kathy?
that's
Because
specific
I'd like
issue.
to know what school it is so that I can contact them directly, if that's okay.
Thank you.
In terms of the 1,000 places versus the 1,000 children, so 1,000 places is based on the presumption, so there's assumptions built in every year based on the projections that we've got, and that's based on an assumption. So it's not relating to individual children. That's based on the assumption, and actually the tendency is to over-assume as well. But for that, to break that down, a small amount of those places will be for P7 to Year 8. More of those places will be in the early years. So as I said earlier, some of those children we don't know coming through into nursery, but some of those children will be nursery moving into P1. So it's based on an assumption of places that are required, as opposed to here's a child that requires a place here. As I said, and I'm sorry to keep going back to process, but I really do need to outline that. If a child started nursery last September with no statement, right, and a need has been identified in the nursery, that child may or may not then enter the 26-week statementing process. The child may or may not get a statement before the end of June. Bear in mind, we're now in April. If the child has a statement now, that statement then will be looking at their nursery placement, not their P1 placement, and will need to be reviewed to determine their P1 placement, right? So that's why that mapping ahead can be very difficult, because is it fair to review a child within a week of a statement? So that's something we're looking at in terms of that statement and process to make that better. If a child has a statement in nursery, it should be looking at the P1 placement.
Can I just come in there? We're talking a scenario, say a child's getting a statement in April for their nursery placement, which they're in now.
They're in the placement.
That statement, they have to wait for a formal review to then look at September, which could be weeks, months down the line.
Currently stands, that statement has to undergo an annual review.
That surely has to be.
And that's something that we're looking at in terms of,
that seems like a really,
yes,
really
we're looking
simple
at that in terms of
mechanism
the process.
to build flexibility in, because that child's needs aren't going to change in the 6 weeks between now and the end of term, or 9 weeks, or whatever it is.
That's what the process currently is, and that's what we're examining under that process, which is why the end-to-end review is actually vital here, because if we don't get in under the process and start to streamline that, likewise there'll be children whose needs have not been identified until now. Is it the right thing to do to put them straight into statementing, or is it better to access stage 2 support services, or is it better that the child's needs are met in the classroom? For those children coming into nursery that already have a statement, is it fair to review that statement within weeks of them being in a preschool environment instead of giving the child the opportunity to be in the preschool environment and to give them that opportunity to enjoy that play-based learning, activity-based learning, and then see where their needs are at 6 months, 8 months down the line before their statement is reviewed. You know.
Apologies for cutting in. Please feel
Sorry.
free to finish the queries.
The geographical areas then, I know I wrote that down, is there work being done in those areas? So yes, the EA wrote to all schools on the 12th of February. Those individual, did I say 291 schools that were contacted, so they are in those geographical areas of pressure, and the solutions that are working their way through. Lorraine had given you those figures in terms of the solutions that are working their way through. So for the most part, there are solutions identified for quite a lot of those pressured areas, and we still need to work to identify more solutions in those areas. But that works. That's the latest information I have, which was back in February. So that will have moved again recently. So there'll have been more solutions identified, and EA can certainly update you on that when they
And
come
that
this
more work,
afternoon.
is that just going back and communicating with schools again or asking schools again?
Contacting more
Yeah.
schools in those areas. They're being contacted individually
Okay.
at the minute.
Sorry, can just on the Downpatrick area, you mentioned that specifically. There's 4 schools identified within Downpatrick where there's agreed solutions for at this point.
Just on the
And
early
years
yeah.
piece. Okay, so yeah, thank you for reminding me. So we have also that work stream on early intervention and the early years piece. And I mean, Lorraine, do you want to talk about the work that you've been doing in your work stream?
So the early intervention work stream includes early intervention in the early years, but it's not. It doesn't. It also includes school age children. Early intervention at the earliest point, I suppose. We've done a bit of work on that. We're currently in the stakeholder engagement phase. We're engaging with early years practitioners, Sure Starts, nursery skills and preschool settings, with health colleagues. That's really important in this space, with the voluntary community sector and with parents. And I suppose we're also looking at good practice in other jurisdictions. And I'm linking in with my counterparts within the early years directorate within the department to make sure that what the solutions we're coming up with are aligned with the early learning and childcare strategy. Some of the early themes that are emerging and that we're working on proposals are about, and none of this is really new, early identification and assessment of need, and that really needs to bring in our health colleagues to make sure that children are accessing the health visiting reviews, that the data is being shared, and also that where children are identified as needing early intervention by way of access to speech and language therapy and the other allied health professions, that they can get those at an early stage. We're looking at the offer within the preschool education programme, and some of the things we're hearing from preschool education settings is around the need for better training, and also to look at the staff-child ratio as the profile of the children change, and that's particularly challenging, I suppose, for statutory nursery settings where the staffing ratio is 2 to 26 children, which becomes very challenging if you've got a number of children in there that need additional support. Also looking at options for developing a programme jointly with health for 2-year-olds with additional needs or emerging additional needs, and looking at what we can do in the space of parents to support them, to support their children at home. So it's all emerging, and we'll be testing those solutions with the stakeholders as we go along.
Okay, thanks, Chair.
Thank you for your time. I wanted to finish with one final question, because we have talked a lot about immediate pressures, and I understand that there was a lot of material in your briefing around the end-to-end review, and that clearly the long-term transformation is really important here, and I think it's important that as a committee we recognise that, and that we want to be involved in supporting in that work. Could I just ask, in terms of that long-term piece, when will there be an action plan, and when will we have timings associated with that, with clear actions arising out of the end-to-end review?
So there's a few things that I need to point out. Each of the 12 work streams are up and running, and in fact some of them, the clarification of policy and legislative intent, things like that are done. The outcomes framework is well underway. And the rest, as you've heard, you know, early years, all of those other work streams are underway. At the minute, we're in the engagement phase.
There's lots of good work, and I've no doubt about that. When will we
thank
get that
you.
all?
Good, because we're working really hard on this.
In a format
while
we can
trying
all
to
see.
keep the
This
stage
is
steady.
what's happening, and these are the timings and the actions. So that
Yeah.
we can see
Okay.
how that's
Well, in
progressing.
terms of there's no jam today is the first thing I would say about that. So we have to get in underneath all of those things, and I'm sure each of you will understand the complexities involved with all of the processes around special educational needs. So we're in that engagement phase at the moment. Following that, we already have early actions that are starting to emerge. So we have together a year one action plan that we think are the early actions that we could bring forward based on deliverability. That's going to require significant investment. All of this is being done with no additional investment from the executive. And in fact, the last number of years we've been operating in a reduced budget with an increasing number of children, which everyone knows about, with an increasing number of children coming through with a multiplicity of need that you've already mentioned, Robbie, and no additional investment. We've had to do it in a reduced budget environment. We've had no additional capital monies, and you've heard my colleague Suzanne Kingan was here telling exactly the same thing. Likewise, we've had no additional resource monies. We've had no additional money for staffing, for training, and I'm talking about our educational staff working in our classrooms, not ourselves in the department. We've had no additional money for any of this. So transformation, we are literally trying to fly a plane and remodel the plane at the same time. You've heard about the increased expenditure that we've had, 544 million to support children with special educational needs, to stand still. In order to transform that system, we estimate we will need around 70 million resource expenditure this year to transform those early year one actions, and that's all of that early intervention piece, all of that CPD, all of that. In order to truly transform the system properly and quickly, we need 70 million resource, we'll need 70 million capital. In the longer term, I won't put those figures out there just yet. You can read the independent review of education and it'll give you a ready reckoner as to what might be needed. But so the year one action plan, I would hope we would be coming with that quite soon, but it'll be absolutely dependent on resource coming from the executive. And I look forward to committee support across all of the parties on that.
Yeah.
But in the longer term, following this engagement piece, and bearing in mind, I will need to get to a point where I need to pull everyone in on the same placements piece. So I will have to set things aside in order to focus on same placements. And I will make that decision in the next week or two, subject to ministerial approval. After that engagement piece that we're doing, and aside from that year one action plan, the longer term action plan will be developed when the engagement piece is done. And I'm not going to consolidate the engagement piece because I think that's really important. We have so many people we need to engage with, and it's not about hearing their views. It's not about listing the issues. We know what the issues are. They're well documented, and we talk to parents and schools and children all the time. It's about the solutions. We can't sit in a darkened room and come up with solutions for saying nobody can. If we do that, it'll be words on a page, but it won't deliver, and it definitely won't deliver on outcomes for children and young people. So the engagement phase is focusing on solutions that people can buy into, that they understand, and that will work. Following that, I'm reliably informed that we will have an action plan, and then that implementation phase will start then. Phase 4 will be that implementation plan. So I can't be really prescriptive because right now the focus is on same placements for us.
And look, it's been very clear from the focus of the committee today, we are mindful of the challenge in that space. I think it had been suggested that an action plan would be available by the summertime, so I just would be concerned that there'd be a lot of slippage.
We will do our best to deliver as best we can, but as I say, having an action plan will put words on a page, Chair, but if we don't have the resource to follow that, then it is just words on a page.
Are there no target dates at all, Janice?
We're aiming for the end, for summertime, for that action plan. But at the minute, as I say, we know what that year one transformation plan will look like, but it's dependent on resources.
But aiming for something and having a target date are two different things. I mean, do you have a target date? Tell us what the target date is.
I can't put a target date on that, Pat, because at the minute there are so many different work streams in train, and other things are having to be pushed back in order to focus on more pressing issues, of which SEND placements is one. So if we're to focus on SEND placements and get that right for September 24, and I've already talked about the crucial window that we have now for the operational plan in terms of area planning, that needs to be focused on. Otherwise, if I prioritise a target date to give words on a page in terms of an action plan and miss the window of actually getting in on the operational plan and the long-term plan for SEND placements, we'll be back next year. So I have to focus on what needs our priority right now. As I said at the very start, I have a very small team and I need to make sure that my resources are deployed, because I don't have any additional resources.
So
I need to make sure they're deployed
So effectively
appropriately.
you're telling us you haven't enough resources to deal with SEND placements this year and consider the implementation plan at the same time? Is that
I
what you're
am
saying?
considering the implementation plan, and we currently are doing that, but I may need to pause on some of the engagement in the work streams or some of the action plan in the work streams in order to pull staff in on SEND placements. I haven't made that decision yet, but I will do subject to ministerial approval. But we are aiming for the summer. That was always the aim, and we will continue to do our very best to meet that aim.
I just bring. I think this is important because the transformation bit is really crucial. So, Robbie, you were wanting to ask?
Yeah, and well, it's not. It's basically on that point where we've had teachers and principals in particular saying it's no good contacting them in July or August, and when they don't have their, and I suppose that's one of the reasons why it needs to be. You need that resource, but in terms of it goes back. It's unfair to do this, but in there's been a reduction in. Yeah, it's to do with Pat's point, but in terms of the resourcing of your offices, because I think EA are in the same position because of the Senko, the reduction in the money for Senkos. So if half the resource, half the money in for Senkos, is there going to be a longer term impact? Do you think if we don't resource the department or EA to fulfil the functions or the findings in the end-to-end review when it comes out?
No doubt, absolutely. I mean, you know, if everyone is saying that SEN is a priority, and I do think SEN should be a priority, and I have thanked the committee for putting it up there as a priority, but saying that something's important and appropriately resourcing it are two different things, and we can have action plans, we can have targets, we can write all that down on a page. If it's not appropriately resourced, it can't be delivered.
Okay.
Thank you. David, 30 seconds.
Yes. I think you're absolutely right. I think one thing I've got quite tired of since we got here as well is people across the chamber, all parties, talking about priorities. If we prioritise everything, we're prioritising nothing. So sometimes when you say you're prioritising something, it means that other things do need to give a little. That's just the fact. If we're going to talk about crisis and we're going to talk about emergencies and we're going to try and pump up the need for things in certain areas, I'm not saying that may be needed, but we need to recognise that comes with its own consequences. And also in terms of the resource and the funding, Chair, I think it is fair to say that is a consequence of the underfunding of Northern Ireland centrally, and I think that does need to be addressed as well, because transformation, it was the same for health, that the British government, in trying to get this place back up and running, were very keen to talk about all of the things that could be done whenever Stormont was up and running, and a lot of it was around transformation of health and of education. Well, we know the transformation costs over and above the basic running of services as we have them now. So if you want to see transformation in more efficient services that cost less in the future, you need to invest up front now. Thanks, Chair.
Yep. I think we're all agreed we're underfunded, and more resource would help us all. Thank you very much for your time today, everybody.
Thank you.
Would members like a quick comfort break, and then we'll bring the EA in and then get through the rest of the agenda. If we're ready to go, we can move straight in. Okay, well we'll do that. If we can say 5 minutes. 5 minutes.
Out of my nose.
Yeah, sorry. Well,
Committee Room 29. Sound.
On what you had answered and what you want to go back on in writing, members. So on the strategic point, the question of what quantum of money has been used to address systemic issues as opposed to keeping steady state, I think might be worth putting in writing. And why cultivate separately the approach by education and health, and what the issues are there with data in particular. Those are the two main things that I took out.
Chair, I'm still completely confused by the 1,000 places and 1,000 children, because when the minister came last, he described it as 1,000 children. So this assumption of 1,000 places, I don't know how many children this is. I think if we could just get written
I
clarity.
think we could seek clarity. I think my understanding is that the 1,000 is an assumption rather than specifically identified children. But I think we're into splitting hairs here.
Well, exactly. It feels like it's deliberately to muddy the waters.
I think we are splitting hairs, but I think seeking clarity of that in writing.
The point was, as I said, 1,000 out of 7,000 is 19%, which is what the figure is, and what difficulty does that create?
An unknown. Yeah.
It's not. It's an unknown. So the other thing is, maybe not for you guys, but I'm definitely intrigued about this presumption for mainstreams thing. I'm not sure that is a good starting point for in the best interest of a child. I understand the inclusive. Nobody more interested in inclusion. However, what is in the best interest of a child?
And I think in terms of the end-to-end review, that development of an inclusive education policy remains in action. But when we see that delivered, where some of those things will be clarified, we'll again we're short on timescales for some of those. But
I think Roy mentioned as well from parents and so on that you engage with on constituency level. There's a difference of opinion on what they think and very strong opinions on where they think that their child should be. So it's not easy to chart orders either.
No.
Those actions are Deputy Chair.
Just want to labour on this issue of health involvement in the local integrated teams. Wonder have we had any communication with health around that? If not, could we write to the minister?
Yeah, that would be.
We certainly
something.
could. I mean, I think we did consider that there were a couple of issues that we might want to do a concurrent meeting with health on as well. Restraint and seclusion being one, and this area.
Or the
being
early
other.
intervention.
Early intervention.
See, I think it's actually quite a simple concept. You know, if we go by the model that the department have been talking about, that rather than having 6 classroom assistants in a class, what they'll do is have a separate class with maybe 1 teacher and a couple of assistants, and then as they need expert support and speech and language, behavioural therapy and so on and so forth, they'll bring it in. So there won't be a multidisciplinary team in a school, but there will be a multidisciplinary team in an area. And so the speech therapist will be in on a Monday, the behavioural therapist on a Tuesday, and you have the team. Let's just take a constituency like West Belfast, where a large number of schools, and we'll have X number of behavioural therapists, speech and language therapists, and so on. I mean, it seems to me not something very difficult to organise. I understand the difficulty that health don't seem to have bought into it yet. If we can believe what we're hearing, for some reason, health don't seem to be too positive about it. But I mean, they seem to be making something complex out of something that to me appears quite simple.
What we've got, I think, with local integrated teams, and again, it can be hard to unpick, is just a slightly modified way of accessing support through the EA, and that doesn't feel multidisciplinary to me at all.
No.
So I think that we maybe do need to. There's maybe a piece of correspondence for health around their engagement on multidisciplinary teams.
Do we have plans for? I know we discussed it, but do we have plans for a joint committee meeting with health? I know we do have for economy, but is there?
Not formally, but should we factor that in?
I think that's something that really would be best stressed in that forum.
Yeah, I think that's either if we don't have time today, but I think at our strategic session, which has been factored in, we can maybe try and really get that nailed down in terms of what we would want to cover in that. But I think that is something we should be exploring. Yeah.
I think Kate and I would both ask at childcare on that agenda as well.
It's all in the early intervention.
Yeah.
So, okay, Robbie, you're excused.
Okay.
All right, so we'll just go into close for the comfort.
Committee Room 29. Sound. Committee Room 29. Sound. Committee Room 29. Sound. Committee Room 29. Sound. Committee Room 29, 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 Sound. Committee room.
Bring the officials in, yeah. Okay, so just refer members to the briefing paper from the committee clerk at page 22 and the briefing paper from the EA at page 25, and it also included correspondence from the Minister of Education regarding the secondment of Richard Pengelly to the post of Chief Executive Officer at the EA, and that's on page 44.
We swap them around, is that okay?
Yes, if you want, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry, Chair.
You're okay, just let you all get settled. Okay, good afternoon. So while you're all getting settled, you're very welcome here at the Education Committee this afternoon, and we're looking forward to hearing your first day briefing today. So I just want to begin by welcoming each of you individually. Today we have Dale Hanna, Director of Children and Young People's Services, Cynthia Curry, Director of Education, Robbie McGreevy, Interim Director of HR and Corporate Services, Donna Allen, Interim Director of Operations and Estates, and also Ivor Johnson, the Temporary Director of Finance. So you are all very welcome here, and thank you for giving up your time to present to committee. We would be asking for an opening presentation of up to 10 minutes. I emphasise up to 10 minutes, and then we'll move to question and answer after that. So
Okay.
it's over to you.
Okay, Chair, thank you. Look, you've done the introductions. What I would just say on behalf of Ivor, Ivor's only just joined us on Monday, so he is very, very new in his role as temporary. Straight into questions.
Ivor's got
What do you want to know? And look, obviously we know we have our new Chief Executive, Richard Pengelly, who's been seconded from the civil service and is taken formally up post on the 15th of April, and no doubt at a future point he will be able to attend. So look, just to go straight in, you'll be aware that EA is a non-departmental body sponsored by the Department of Education. It's the largest single employing authority in Northern Ireland with over 44,000 staff. We're responsible for the delivery of efficient, equitable education, support and youth services across Northern Ireland to meet the needs of children and young people. You'll understand the education landscape in Northern Ireland is complex and multi-layered, and as a result the EA has different statutory duties depending on the type of school. In all of its work, the EA is accountable to the EA Board, who ensures that all policies and actions support the Executive's programme for government and the strategic policies of the Minister of Education and are conducted with appropriate governance, regularity, probity and deliver value for money. Before I touch on some of the key priority areas, it's important to look back to the genesis of the Education Authority, which is very relevant to the many challenges we continue to face. The establishment of EA, or the establishment of the Education and Skills Authority, which was never formed, spanned a 10-year period, during which time the necessary improvement and investment to remain aligned with other public sector organisations was significantly reduced. Therefore, when EA was established and became operational on the 1st of April 2015, the immediate priority was critical business need to maintain service delivery. This resulted in gaps in culture, process, policy and strategy. However, from 2019, the EA has been on a journey of transformation, and despite the many challenges we face, a number of significant improvements have been made. I would want to stress at the heart of everything we strive to do are children and young people, the wider school communities and our staff. This is evidenced in our work to support children and the wider education system throughout COVID, our absolute commitment to improve the experiences of children with special education needs, in our support for newcomer children and in the significant work undertaken to develop new digital services to support young people, parents and carers and schools. We have developed a people plan, which we'll be launching in the next few weeks, to begin our journey towards being an organisation that all of our people feel proud to work for and where they feel valued and supported and can see the impact they make. We've also set up a people-focused HR programme to ensure we deliver high-quality, impactful services and support to schools and staff in line with best practice. And from a broader organisational point of view, as a result of robust strategic and financial management, despite all the financial pressures, we have managed to break even. Whilst we have made much progress across a range of areas, we do recognise that there's much more to be done, and we are very ambitious about the further change which needs to take place. Both the landscape review of EA and the independent review of education provide a firm foundation for moving forward and will play an important part in how we can collectively
and collaboratively develop a modern and responsive education system. In particular, there is significant work underway in relation to the implementation of a joint DE-EA landscape review action plan. There is a genuine desire to continue to transform services in the best interests of children. However, the reality is there is nowhere near enough funding to support all aspects of the education sector in Northern Ireland. Education has been underfunded for more than a decade, and the budget continues to reduce further in real terms. It is estimated that a recurrent funding gap of over 350 million will arise in the current financial year, and this is before the recurrent cost of the teachers' pay settlement, the cost of the pay and grading review, and costs for any other pay award settlements are taken into consideration. In addition, the EA is anticipating a significant capital funding gap which could be in excess of £100 million. This gap assumes that EA will largely only incur expenditure on contractual and inescapable expenditure. The EA has made significant efforts to make savings and efficiencies through our Savings and Sustainability Programme. However, the vast majority of funding received is used almost exclusively to provide funding to schools and to deliver services that support schools and children, and most of those services are statutory services, so we must provide those services. This means there is extremely limited scope to reduce services further without impacting directly on schools and ultimately on children and young people. It is therefore vital there is sustained investment in education and in the innovation and transformation of services. Looking to the year ahead, one of EA's most critical priorities is ensuring that all children and young people with special education needs get the right support from the right people at the right time and in the right place. Over the past 12 months, the Department of Education, in collaboration with ourselves, have undertaken an end-to-end review of special education needs, and this has identified several priority areas which can be progressed at pace and used to inform long-term systemic change. A critical immediate priority is increasing the number of places in special schools and specialist provisions in mainstream schools. You will be aware that there has been a significant rise in the number of pupils with a statement over the last 6 years. For September 2024, we are currently planning on the basis that approximately 100 additional specialist classes across the region will be required. We are in discussions with nearly 170 schools regarding the establishment of additional classes, and we very much need the continued support from schools to deliver the required places. Quite simply, demand is outstripping supply. What we've been doing in partnership with schools and sectoral partners is utilising the existing school estate and working with the community, voluntary and private sector to create appropriate additional places for children with SEN. Since 2020, 480 specialist provisions in mainstream classes in over 190 schools have been set up, providing quality education experiences for pupils with special needs. 140 additional classes have also been established over the last 3 academic years in special schools, including 8 dual campus sites, all of which are now operational. This extensive system-wide effort has ensured that we've been able to ensure that each year, despite unprecedented challenges and demand, the vast majority of children receive an appropriate place at the start of the new school year. However, we have been engaging and listening carefully to the stories and voices of parents and absolutely recognise the uncertainty and anxiety that late placements and poor communication causes, and I'm sure we'll come on to that. We can talk about that in more detail. We will continue to do our utmost to create additional places, provide greater certainty for parents and improve communications with them. However, there are undoubtedly challenges, and there is no doubt without sustained investment, continued transformation and systemic change in line with the end-to-end review of special education needs and the Special Education Strategic Area Plan, real change will not be delivered. It is also critical that we invest in all of our staff, both teaching and support staff right across the sector, and we very much welcome that the 5 trade unions which make up the Northern Ireland Teachers' Council have accepted the 3-year pay offer on behalf of their members. This was formally ratified on the 9th of April, and this settlement ends all industrial action by teachers and school leaders, which has been going on since May 2022. In relation to the pay and grading review for support staff, the Minister has outlined the business case approval has now been received from the Department of Finance to enable issues to be progressed with the current grading structure for support staff. Significant additional funding will be required to enable the preferred option to be implemented, and we understand the Minister has submitted a bid for the required additional funding as part of the 24-25 budget round, and we really hope that that is going to be successful. However, we remain very concerned that disruption to the education of our young people will continue as funding has not been identified to meet the cost of EA pay and grading review, and the members of the support unions remain on action short of strike. The support unions have indicated that they will have no option other than to escalate if there isn't progress made on that business case. We don't underestimate the challenges facing EA and the wider sector, but look forward to continuing to work in partnership to build on the positive work to date now and in the future. Thank you, Chair. We're happy to take questions.
Thank you. And you'll be aware we had the department in for our previous evidence session, and that was very much focused on SEN, and I'd be focusing my initial questions on that. I don't know what other areas other members want to cover. We do, and I used this phrase when we spoke with the department, and there was a little bit of pushback around the phrase, but I would characterise where we are as in another year of crisis management in terms of placements for SEN. The department maybe didn't like that language, I don't think, when we raised it, but I would characterise it as a crisis scenario. It does look that we are looking for SPIMs, these specialist provisions in mainstream, as one part of the solution to manage that. What assurances can you give the committee, and what assurances indeed can you give parents who are waiting for placements for their children, that those placements and those specialist provisions in mainstream will actually be the right support at the right time from the right people in the right place? Will they be appropriate placements, or are they just what is needed to manage a crisis? Because I think we need to maintain our focus that there are children requiring and have a right to an education. So will those placements and those specialist provision in mainstream units be the right and appropriate placements that meet their needs?
So I think, Chair, the simple answer to that is yes, they will be the appropriate placement to meet the needs, and at some point in this answer I'm going to ask Cynthia to speak a little bit about what those placements look like. So in terms of the analysis of crisis management, we're certainly in a very challenging and complex environment in terms of what we're trying to achieve in terms of the getting the right places for our children and young people. I mean, last year it was an unprecedented position in terms of we had a reasonable planning assumption that there would be an increase of 5 to 6% of children with special needs that needed a place. Actually, what turned out was closer to 4 or 5-fold that figure. So that was very difficult last year in terms of trying to manage that and trying to put in place the appropriate arrangements for those children and young people in terms of the places across the system. We've spent a considerable amount of time this year revisiting our planning assumptions around that, and we know that the number, in additional places for about 1,000 children has been used. That is sort of the figure that we're looking at. We think that it's going to be an additional 1,000 places. There's an additional 1,000 children that need to be placed this year, predominantly in early years in primary school settings, but also across all the other transition points. So we've been working to that. Thus far, we've had different milestones, and our assumptions seem to be that is the case. Thankfully, it doesn't appear to be increasing, so the number of new referrals appears to be levelling off. So I think that's a positive sign for the future in terms of
in terms of those SPIMs. If I was a parent and I was advised that my child had a placement in a SPIM, will there be the workforce required with the specialist skills, training, experience? Will there be the wraparound support going in to meet those children? Can you describe what that's going to look like? Because I'm not aware if there's been any sort of analysis done of how those SPIMs have operated in the previous year that were established at pace for September 23. If we don't have that evidence base, how do we know that what we're putting in place this year is actually going to be effective? And I really would want to draw out on the workforce issue. We had an informal briefing just yesterday with some of the trade union representatives, and they were very concerned around the availability of workforce and actually whether or not it's an attractive option to go into this kind of work as a classroom assistant, given the terms and conditions. And also, are there enough teachers with the necessary skills to staff these new classes?
So you
probably pick up on the support,
and then we can pick up on the workforce.
I suppose one of the things, Chair, that we need to remind ourselves of is that SPIM is, if you like, it's a new acronym, it's a new term, but units, as they were called, or learning support centres, have been here for many, many years. with some excellent examples of children that have gone through the system and been part of that. I know certainly
not set up at the pace at which they are being.
Not,
now.
I was about to say that, Chair. So yeah. So I mean, certainly in the school that I was principal of, we had a lot of experience of this and a lot of experience in terms of integrating children to the mainstream. It was a post-primary school. But what I can say then in setting up, we have set up alongside setting up the specialist provisions, the specialist setting support team. So we have a multi-service team, links in very clearly with our settings. There is a link person in that team that links to each of the SPIMs. And then within each of those settings, they look at a skills analysis for the staff that are in the setting. They look at the profile of children within the setting. They help the school in how they may set up their room and some of the practical day-to-day modelling of what support will look like. And that particular model has got lots of positive feedback, and indeed is also gathering evidence of what is the baseline when a school starts with a SPIM, you know, how are children progressing through that, how do staff feel their confidence is growing after working with the team. So we've had that information for the last couple of years as that team has grown more and more. I suppose what we would seek to do is try to grow that model even more, because the new provisions that are being set up are getting that really intense support, often on the ground, boots on the ground, staff out helping and modelling. But there are provisions that have been set up for a number of years that are looking at children with complex needs and do require more support, and it's that element that we're moving into to try to grow the model that we currently do have. But look, I can assure Chair that there is a lot of work in this space, a lot of professional development in the space, and coming from that particular team, and they have both universal targeted bespoke programmes, and also they have cluster work across schools so that they can learn from practice across each of the schools. So there's certainly a lot of positive feedback from that particular team and the schools that they work with. Also, in addition to that's looking, I suppose, at the educational piece, but there is the practical setup. So we have cross-directorate teams within the Education Authority working on placements, so whether that's operations and estates in terms of the accommodation or resourcing, and those teams come together to support the school at the early stages of development.
I think, Chair, in terms of Cynthia's comments about supporting the schools, I think what's really important is we have a model there to support that, but that needs to be resourced. Now, the department have asked us, and again, I'm going to quote this figure off the top of my head. I think the figure is sort of circa 23 million. So, yes, we are operating at pace, setting up all of those additional SPIMs and another capacity. And we want to, and we need to support those schools so that they can provide the right education for children and young people. But that needs to be resourced. In terms of the workforce piece, that is absolutely challenging, Chair. And yes, we're currently looking to see how we can support the system, particularly around the likes of classroom assistants. Can we do some sort of like mass recruitment process? But again, the pay and grading issues are an issue for people coming into the sector. And again, with the teachers, again, it's difficult in the sense that individual schools are responsible for their own recruitment. So until we know that a SPIM or a provision has been set up in a particular school, then we can't do anything in advance of that. But certainly all of our teams, the recruitment teams internally, this is our absolute number one priority organisationally, and all of our teams, whatever they're involved in, are pivoting towards supporting whatever's needed both internally and both within the broader system.
I mean, I think certainly from what we heard from the trade unions, there seems to be a concern among even a lot of classroom assistants that they don't always access the training that they feel they need to meet the level of complexity of need. So I think it is absolutely critical that anybody coming in to staff one of these SPIMs is properly trained to deal with that level of complexity. The members will want to come in. I just want to ask one other question. I think everybody in this room, who in their constituency office, will have dealt with parents in a state of distress at some point leading up to September of last year with the issue around placements. And one of the things that was fed back to me, and I think this will be echoed by everybody, was that they felt the communications between parents and EA were very poor, and I'm choosing my words carefully. I think that's being kind. I think at times it was non-existent, is the phrase that was used, that they could not access a link officer. They just could not get someone to pick up the phone. And that, from the beginning of a statement, I have a family who described statementing process began, and they didn't hear from anybody until they were being offered a placement. And that cannot be acceptable in terms of the link officer contact. What plans have you got in place to ensure that that is not reflected this year? We appreciate the context is difficult, but one thing surely that we can get right is the communications with parents who really, in some cases, they just want to hear, even if there's no news, just to hear that somebody is still aware of their child in this process.
Chair, look, that was definitely something that we heard very loud and clear last year, and we also met with parents, and it was obvious that there was a lot of distressed parents and they felt they couldn't get through the link officer. So just to provide some assurance, what we're currently developing is a model. So we're working on an assumption that it is going to be difficult and challenging to place all children before the 1st of September, and that there will be, when we get to the 30th of June, a number of pupils and families that have yet to have their place confirmed. And what we're going to do, and I'm going to use the phrase wraparound or hypercare, what we're going to do is identify that particular cohort of families. We're going to put in an enhanced form of support where they will have a nominated person who will be like a super link officer, and that individual will be committed to those number of families that they'll have. They'll work with a much smaller number of families than a link officer would normally work with, and they will support that family throughout that period of the summer until we get their place established, and hopefully that will be before the end of the summer, but also work with that family should there be an eventuality that we're unable to get a place before the 1st of September. So we're currently working on what that would look like. That will mean diverting internal resource from other priorities and other service delivery areas to do that. So look, Chair, we've really heard that message that we need to support those families. So we're going to put in a wraparound hypercare system. I don't like that phrase, hypercare, but what we're going to do is put in a dedicated team to support those families that find themselves in that position, and hopefully that will address, we're confident that that will address the issue of communication for those families that find themselves in that position.
I would just emphasise, obviously, if a child is in place, they'll need that input, but parents need the communication now as well, because the system is live for them now, and the concern around placements is live now. So we would be keen to see comms at the highest, best possible level from now. There'll be lots of other members wanting to come in. I'll bring the deputy chair in. So asking for question and answers to take 7 minutes. So make sure answers are direct and to the point, so we can get to the query.
Thanks, Chair.
Deputy Chair.
Dale, currently you have 3 interim directors, 1 temporary director. You have a new chief executive coming in. I'm not sure what title is he going to have. Is he interim, or is he permanent, or temporary, or?
Our new chief executive is the interim chief executive.
Okay. Well, all those interims and temporaries in any organisation would suggest a level of instability within the organisation. And the EA has taken a hammering over the last number of years around the same issue, and particularly the placements every year. And I'm not necessarily blaming the EA for all the problems that exist. The department needs to take its responsibility as well. But I have, Nick mentioned the whole issue of all this trying to be sorted out at pace. We writing out to all the schools, we need you to take set up a new provision for special needs within your school and so on. And some of the stories we're hearing are quite horrendous, that some children aren't getting the places that they need and require, and the learning of some children is being disrupted by other children being put into an environment where they shouldn't be. So, I've spoken to parents with children with very complex needs, physical needs in particular, and have been placed in an environment with children who simply have behavioural issues, and the two don't seem to go together. It's like oil and water, putting the two together. So I'm just flagging up some of those issues. But in terms of the audit report that was carried out a few years ago about the value for money, and the EA and the department couldn't show that there was value for money despite hundreds of millions. And now, I mean, over 50% of the block grant is going on special needs. So have there been any improvements? And if there have, can you explain where they are?
Okay, so I suppose just firstly what I want to comment on the leadership piece. I think that although we are an interim team, we're all experienced leaders. We've been around a few blocks. So look, I was just want to provide some assurances around that. We're absolutely committed to being, we're part of the corporate leadership team, and whilst we're not interim, and to use the football analogy, whilst some of us might be subs, we're on the pitch and we're playing for Manchester United. So we're on the pitch and we're there to do a job. So I just want to provide some assurances around that. In terms of the again, you're making the point about children in classes with their peers. I don't know, Cynthia, are you able to pick up on that?
I suppose just in terms of the specialist provision, specialist setting support team will work with the staff, and if there are issues like that are identified where there's a group of children that doesn't seem to gel together, and there have been different needs that emerge, and of course children's needs change over time even after being placed within a setting. So our teams internally, both Dale's team and the specialist support team in my directorate, would then be seeking to try to address that or to support the staff in helping the children who are in those particular positions.
Yeah, but pardon me for interrupting you, but why would you need a specialist team to tell you that putting children with behavioural difficulties, with no physical issues, in a classroom with children with severe physical difficulties, well, why would you need a specialist team to tell you that's not a good idea?
No, I don't think you wouldn't need a specialist team. You would know that quite clearly. And another one is children with autism, for example, who have sensory needs. But what I'm saying is that for some, the children, their needs do change. For example, if we take children in the early years or in primary one, where their needs manifest themselves more evidently, then you have children with behavioural needs, and those behaviours may become more evident than when the children were placed in the first place. I know certainly that the statutory assessment team in Dale's directorate will also look at the profile of the class when they're placing a child. So they look at the child's needs, but they do work with the profile of need on that as well. But there are times that you find that you do need to make a change of placement along the way.
Yeah, and I mean, I understand, given that you're trying to establish this provision at pace, that sometimes it is going to be difficult to make sure everything works in the way it's supposed to. But the department are promoting, and I'm not sure whether the EA have been collaborating on this, talking about a new model in terms of the special provision in mainstream, that rather than having 4, 5, 6 classroom assistants in a mainstream class, which in itself could be disruptive, that those children would be moved out into another classroom, maybe with one teacher, a couple of classroom assistants, and then as it's needed, specialist provision would be brought in, speech and learning, behavioural therapy, and so on and so forth. But we're hearing, has EA been involved in collaboration around that model with the department?
I mean, in terms of the end-to-end review, then one of the strands is classroom assistant model in terms of deployment. I suppose I need to say at the outset, obviously, I mean, we have a significant workforce of classroom assistants. There's about 15,000 across Northern Ireland, and they're dedicated to children and young people. But yes, as part of the end-to-end review, there is going to be work to look at what alternative models might be available to schools and settings, which may deviate from the classroom assistant approach.
I suppose the point I want to get to is that, if that model is going to be established, it will need the support of parents, because if a statement says a child needs one-to-one support, parents are going to be reluctant to give that up unless they can be convinced that the equivalent support or better support is going to be available. And we're here now, well, first of all, we heard that the multidisciplinary team's name has been changed to local integrated teams. And we're also hearing now that health hasn't really bought into this yet. So there's going to be difficulty in terms of providing the necessary support from a health perspective. And the reason I'm asking you, and I'm not clear yet whether the EA have been involved in these discussions around this new model or not, but how is it going to work unless you can convince parents that children are going to get the support they need?
So I think there's two things as well. So I think it's there's an important clarification point there, so that we don't merge two issues. So in terms of the classroom assistant approach, classroom assistant at the minute is normally provided where a child has a statement. In terms of the local integrated teams, that's very much about, and Cynthia might talk a little bit later on about that, that's very much about the support, the graduated response to children before they would reach having a statement. So that's at stage 1 and stage 2 of the process. So the local integrated teams is very much about going in and supporting schools before a child ever gets to needing a formal statement. The piece about the classroom assistants is very much around the traditional approaches that there would be a classroom assistant provided based on what was advised or in the advices of the educational psychologist, for example. So there are two different pieces of work, and so it's important that we don't merge that. So we are working collaboratively with the department around what that classroom assistant piece might look like, and there's been early engagement in that. And then the other piece around the local integrated teams, which is about supporting schools and about making sure that we get the right response into the children at an early stage, because we talk about early intervention. The local integrated teams is all about early intervention and providing that support long before, and hopefully the appropriate intervention before a child ever needs to get to the stage where they have a statement.
Thank you. Cheryl, you were next.
Thank you, Chair. So actually just following on from one of your points, communication is a massive issue, as the Chair has pointed out there, for parents in this situation. One of the things I keep hearing is that the lack of replies to emails or phone calls and voicemails and sickness and things like that. In terms of staff, are staff still currently working from home within the department, or are staff back in the building? And then in terms of what departments are you working with? I have another question just in terms of data. So data sets are a major issue throughout the whole government here, and it's something I think that we need to build on. So it's just to ask, has an assessment been carried out to investigate the school estate and what is readily available to address saying, or is the contact only made with schools in the light of a situation in a high demand area?
So,
do you want me to go on about the school estate?
Yeah, you take the one about the school estate, and then I'll come back in about the about the homeworking.
Yeah. As part of the homeworking, and we'll pick up that point in more detail, but we are looking at all of our estates. Absolutely, we have lots of estate, and a lot of our corporate estate would have been old schools. So as part of that capital strategy, we are absolutely looking at our school estates in terms of solutions for SEN placements, and we have a number of examples across where we have, in Dundonald and Balee and wherever, where we've actually got, special schools now in that estate. So I suppose in terms of reviewing our estate, absolutely the first priority is, would it be suitable for SEN accommodation? It is our highest priority in the organisation. So that is absolutely taken into consideration. So we're not looking at schools, but obviously the schools then have to obviously run the area and whatever. But in terms of actual physical accommodation, we're looking at our corporate estate as well, and we're looking at other more out of the box. We're looking at things like mobile classrooms. We're getting them from County Kildare. We're bringing up mobile classrooms and putting them on other sites. So we look at every single potential option. Nothing is ever ruled out, and
and my team have been working really, really hard around that. And the time periods are very condensed to what we would normally refurbish a classroom or build or put a modular building in. We've really, really condensed those timeframes down considerably. And that is staff working, flat out on that, and it is a priority for the organisation. So just to give you that assurance.
I think in terms of the schools, I think what I would say there is it's difficult to have a sense of it sort of from a strategic piece, because, take a school that might have 10 classrooms. On paper, they might have 70 kids, and one might look at that and go, well, actually, theoretically, there should be 3 spare classrooms, and we should be able to put in a specialist provision. In reality, though, each school's environment is different, and how the senior leadership team in each of those schools have developed how their learning environment might mean that when we actually go to visit that school, there isn't the 3 spare classrooms. So I think that's perhaps important. So on paper we might think there's spare capacity within a particular school building, but actually when we go to meet with the school, they have, I don't want to use spread out, but they have utilised the space for the best intentions of the children and young people that are already in the school.
That communication, is that ongoing, or has that been across Northern Ireland then, or is it just focused on those high demand areas at the moment, and how is that kind of communication done?
So initially we wrote to all schools, and we are working with colleagues in the department to send out another series of letters, which will be much more focused and targeted to the areas that we know we have our pressure areas. In terms of the home working, what I would say is we operate, like many modern organisations, a hybrid approach. But I'm happy to ask Robbie just to give a little bit more detail about our approach around that.
Thank you.
Yep, look, we have an agile working policy, just like most private sector and public sector organisations now do. Post-COVID is not the same as, we're not going back to pre-COVID. And we're all competing in the same pool in terms of resources and recruitment and retention. And so it is important that you have a policy on that to be able to attract and retain staff. And we know that we have recruited staff who have told us they would not have come to work for us if we didn't have an agile working policy in place. And it was actually, they didn't come for the salary, but they came for the agile working approach because of where they lived. Maybe out in the west or whatever, and made it possible for them to apply for and take the job on. Now, what goes along with that is an assessment by every line manager. So an application has to be made for agile working, it has to be assessed by the manager, and it can be withdrawn at any time. And we monitor the performance against that. So we also have a customer excellence programme in place to try to improve and listen, because we've listened to phones not being answered, people not being contacted and so on. So for our direct services that interact directly with parents or with schools, we monitor those now. So we know when calls are, we have the information that I haven't got with me today, but we have the numbers of calls answered when. There's some lessons to be learnt from that information, so we know at real peak times that we don't always have enough staff on to answer those calls, so that there's work around that as well. We have good feedback systems put in place for school leaders now in terms of the service that we're providing, and what's coming through more in relation to that now is not so much that the calls aren't being answered, but when they get through, they maybe don't get through to the person that they need to speak to who can answer the query that they have. So we're doing some work in relation to that as well. So I suppose I would say yes, we do have an agile working policy, but we do monitor the performance against that.
I think, can I just add to that? I think particularly from a special needs point of view, the number of children that have statements is about 20-25%, and that increases the volume of calls coming in. We haven't had, and this isn't about every time we say something it's about additional resource, but the reality is our staff teams haven't increased. So across many of our services, our teams are really, really stretched. And I think some people have put 2 and 2 together and said, staff from EA are working from home and they're not answering the phones. That is not the case. People are working really, really hard in the organisation. They are answering the phone, and I think, as Robbie has articulated, sometimes there's a frustration because they haven't got the answer. If a parent phones up and says, I want to know where my child's going, and we're saying, we don't know where your child's going because we haven't created the place yet, I can understand how in that scenario that parent is really, really frustrated and feels that we haven't answered their query properly. But in terms of actually answering the phone, I don't believe we've any any systemic organisational issue around that.
No, I appreciate that, and I think it's just a point to say that I suppose for any parent in that situation, sometimes the comfort of that reply, regardless of what that reply is, that does give them some sense of warmth to know that somebody is listening to them. So I think that's the point. I do get with agile work, and there is a place for it, but in terms of communication, collaboration, and making sure human contact is one of the main things that to get work driven there. So it's just a point, and it's good to hear that's being monitored.
Draw this one to a close.
Thank
Cheryl.
you. Yes, I'm done.
Yeah. So I would just add to that I think parents feel they are lost in the system sometimes when you don't get an answer. You feel like your case has somehow been lost. In that case, as a child. So I think that's the key bit to remember. Kate.
Thank you, Chair. I actually would assume that the main reason why people aren't getting responses is because of the level of sick leave and issues within the department. And you know that I put questions in about the number of people who have been off, and I think 3,042 days out of 1 year for 138 people is something that's very concerning. And I guess that is where I would go to the solution of the super link officer. That concerns me because for me it seems like there's an organisational problem with so many people being off, and I'm just worried that creating this new role isn't necessarily creating the issues that have resulted in so many people being off. So maybe that's something you can comment on. But there were kind of two separate things that I wanted to, and I'll put them all together. The business case for the non-teaching staff pay and grading review. Who's to blame for that? I wanted to ask if EA will continue funding non-EA nurseries like Mancap and Senspace this year. St John Vianney in my constituency, a brilliant youth club. I know they have asked to extend the deadline from the 12th of April to give the community breathing space to respond to that. Have you any update on that? And finally, you come under a lot of criticism, but I just want to pay tribute to your intercultural team who are excellent. I do a lot of work with asylum seekers and refugees, and I don't work with every department within the EA as much as I'm really new to this committee, but the people I've been working with I think are exceptional, and I just want to put that on record. Sick leave, pay and grading, non-EA nurseries, and St John Vianney. What do you want?
Can I just ask you to ask the question again about the youth club piece again, so I understand it?
LORAG have written to the EA and all the South Belfast elected reps were signatories to it. So there is tender for youth service funding, and there was a request to extend the deadline from the 12th of April just to give some breathing space for the community to be able to respond to that.
Okay, so that's a response to a tender then?
Yeah.
All right. Well, look, I
5 minutes still, so there's a lot to get through there.
Firstly, in terms of the nursery, I don't believe we have any intention not to continue to fund in that space. Okay. In terms of the tender for the youth services, then that day, the 12th of April, we're going to have to come back on that. I don't have the detail on what we're able or not able to do. In terms of the, I'll ask Robbie in a second to talk about the business case for the non-teaching piece, but in terms of the sick leave, so I think that question was specifically around the statutory assessment team.
It was,
as I recall. Okay, so yes, I think some of that, I have to be honest and say, I think some of that sick leave is indicative of the pressure that team is under. So they are the team that are working directly with parents, and yes, that is very, very challenging. So two things. What I don't want to do is conflate the issue around what I call the superlink officer there. That's very much about addressing an issue over this summer. That's about working with those parents that maybe find themselves this summer without a place. In the long term, we know that the number of statements have increased by about 20%, so we are going to have to find a way to increase the capacity of that team by an equivalent amount.
And the quality, Dale, there are so many comments about copy and paste and inaccuracies within the statements, which I think is quite concerning.
Right, okay, well look, that's helpful feedback. We'll take that away and look at that. So yes, I think there is a pressure in that team. I think for some individuals it has perhaps played out in terms of sick leave, but I don't want you to link it with the arrangements for the summer.
That's fair enough. And then you were going to comment on the pay and grading review.
So, well, look, what I will say is the pay and grading business case took longer than any of us wanted in relation to that. But we do have to remember it was a complex business case. It's for multi-millions of pounds. We submitted it first in February 23. There was significant engagement then with the department in relation to it, and you expect that there's economists and so on involved back and forwards. That took longer than we had hoped, but in November of 23 we all got together with the department. We went through all the final issues, and we hoped at that stage it was finished. So then in December it was submitted to the Department of Finance. They come back with their queries. That's all part of the process in terms of any business case. We went back very quickly in relation to those, but they flagged at that time that GMI and voluntary grammars weren't included in the business case. Now, we wouldn't include them because we weren't the employer, and we wouldn't have the information in relation to those staff. But it was a valid point because it was repercussive for those schools in terms of what was being proposed. So the department worked with us at that time and gave us the information that we required, and we included that in the business case as well. And then the final delay in the business case was caused because the business case was prepared at a point in time. So the information that we used originally in the business case was from November 21, and that was the pay remit information that was available then. At the end of 22-23 in December, we had outturn figures for our pay remit, which indicated that the numbers and the costs had increased from what they were in 21. And we know what that was for. It was because of SAN exponential growth, and 84% of our salaries, our cost in the organisation is salaries. So that flagged to us that the business case was in, but because of that change in the numbers, and we had now outturned numbers, we needed to address that. So we informed the department, I believe, on the 13th of February that we wanted to look at the increase in the SAN figures. We did that. We came back very quickly in relation to that. At the start of March, we had a tripartite meeting with the unions, DE and ourselves. We took them through what the issue was that had arisen, and we agreed a number of actions as a result of that. We met all of those actions, and we're really pleased that the Department of Finance signed off on the business case last week. The big issue is that business case needs funded. We know that there'll continue to be disruption in our schools. We know we won't be able to recruit and retain the staff that schools need if that money isn't found and the business case isn't approved. So there's a recruitment and retention issue, but there'll be a continuation of industrial action for our young people if we can find the money for that.
Yeah, thank you.
David?
Thanks very much, Chair. I guess first to follow on from some of what my colleague Cheryl had raised around the school estate, and you were talking about how some schools may 10 classrooms and so on, and one of them maybe, or a couple of them maybe have different uses or spread out more. I just think it's important to comment, as we were saying earlier, I've been to a special school in my constituency where cupboards have been turned into, storage cupboards have been turned into classrooms, and they're I was saying earlier, there's full and there's full, and there's full to capacity and bursting at the seams. And I think what is being done, I guess, to review to make sure that, one, you're proactively working to try and make sure that schools are willing to accept STEM pupils in SPIMS and so on, but that those who are saying no or saying that they're full and can't accept, that it's looked at relatively to some of the others that are accepting and maybe are sort of more bursting at the seams, to ensure that there is an understanding of how full some of our schools are, because it does feel, even in the analysis that you're given, that some schools have preferential uses for some of their classrooms and maybe optimal, but in the current crisis situation that we seem to be in with this, is it right that some schools are able to have that provision, while other schools are literally, and some of the schools dealing with our most vulnerable pupils are literally bursting at the seams? They do not have room for storage because the storage is being used for teaching, and what storage they have is often there's issues with leaks getting in, and damp and everything else. So I just think those things need to be treated relatively. And I guess related to that, I guess then could we get some idea of what the figures in terms of the school estate more generally, what it is costing to maintain the school estate year on year for maybe the last couple of years, but then what's maybe forecast going into the future as well?
I just pick up on the special schools. I think it's really important. You're absolutely right. Special schools are bursting at the seams, and for those members here who have been meeting with us and have met with us over the last 2 to 3 years, whenever we do political briefings, we've consistently said that we need to build more special schools because we have maxed out on the capacity within the special schools, and that is obviously part of the difficulty then in terms of capacity. At the minute, what we're trying to do is be creative around that. We obviously have some plans in place for special schools in Belfast, for new special schools. But ultimately, all of those require investment, and a new special school is probably going to be £25 million. We think we could build 4 special schools in Belfast and fill them straight away. And there's other provincial towns as well, Dungannon, Downpatrick, Knockhaven, that need special school as well. So there's lots of requirement for special schools, and we're working that. In the short term, what we're trying to do around creating additional capacity in special schools, and Donna alluded to it earlier on there, is so for example in St George's in Belfast, what we're doing is trying to be creative on we have a site called the Suffolk site, and we've procured a modular special school from the Republic of Ireland that they've been using to help sustain their rise in special needs children, and it is our intention to get that onto that site. We've also been able to purchase land in Rothore in Newry, so again we will be able to expand special school provision there. We're working in North Belfast area to look at the old Deanby site to see if there's anything we can do there to create special school provision as well. So we're working really hard in that area to try and do that. So in terms then of special schools and additional special schools, yes, that is challenging, and that is where we try to set up SPYEF, as we call them, which is a much more focused special school type establishment, and we've had some really successful examples of that. For example, in St Columban's and Kilkeel is an example of that. I'll pass to Donna just to talk a little bit about the maintenance thing.
So I suppose it's difficult to say how much we need or how much. So I can tell you what we've spent. It's not enough, and I know the department, you've had a session around the capital. I'm not going to repeat all of that. We need considerable hundreds of millions. So we estimate that our maintenance backlog in terms of all of our schools is about 450 million, but actually we're not even sure how accurate that figure is. So we're embarking on a new kind of condition survey programme, a 5-year rolling programme, so that we get a much more accurate picture now. Those are really historical figures, and they've been added on year. So we're going to target all schools, and we're starting with probably the schools that are in the poorest condition, and we're doing a condition survey in terms of what they might need to bring them to where they need to be, and how much that will cost, and that'll be for 5, and by the end of 5 years we'll have went round all of our school estate. But in terms of what we've spent this year, I'll just give you some figures. So in terms of, and I suppose the other thing to say is, unfortunately, because of the capital situation, we only are really able to do response maintenance is mainly. So as you all know, as your car gets older, it's going to cost more to repair. So the majority of our spend last year was on response maintenance. So in terms of our current budget, we spent about 30 million in terms of response maintenance, and planned maintenance there's about 24 million in terms of capital. I've talked about the backlog. We also did minor works to the value of about 30 million, but 2/3 of that was dedicated to SEN. The majority of it went to SEN because and we talked about all the additional places and the needs for refurbs and modular accommodation. So in terms of how much we need to address the backlog, there's a figure of 450 million, but we're not sure how accurate that is, and we think it's much better that we do this refreshed programme over 5 years, and that the highest need is identified, and we can discuss with the department the prioritisation of that need.
Thanks very much. Just one more thing.
Briefly, yeah.
Sorry. Is the I guess to reflect what others have said, I think the communication piece is key, and I understand that vacancies and sickness and so on will add to that. But I think that idea of not answering the phone, the person who's ringing or quite often emailing isn't necessarily seeing that nuance in terms of what's causing it. They just don't see that they're not getting a response. And we've had a complaint. We put a complaint in through my office that was upheld as well. I'm not going into anything that's identifiable around that. Don't worry about that. But that they had their paperwork in for a year 13 placement. Their paperwork in February. Nothing was done to progress that until June. And despite trying to get in contact with EA several times through themselves and ourselves, that wasn't the communication wasn't there in a timely way. And my understanding is that the child actually is still not in placement. So I'm asking, yes, there's someone who their year 13 placement has not been given essentially. What happens with someone like that? Because I would hate to think that it's basically the clock has run out. They get to a certain age, and that's no longer education's responsibility. That has an ongoing effect in terms of their further and higher education, and ultimately the lives of those people saying who already have a number of obstacles in their way in order to
move to answer. I think
yes,
on this one question.
Well, you get the gist of it anyway. So,
I'm first of all sorry that family find themselves in that position. I'm assuming we're talking about a mainstream pupil or a special needs pupil.
I think they're seeking mainstream.
They're seeking. I mean, normally.
I'll bring the details to you.
We not deal with a specific case.
No, but I was going to speak generally. I mean, generally, it is up to the schools. So once we do the mainstream piece, which is the yearly cycle at the nursery P1. P7 going into P8, Dixon plan going in from year 12 into year 13. I've got those years wrong probably. And then if you go from age 14 and then age 16, anything outside of that. So for example, that pupil coming in at a different transition point, they then need to do that directly with the individual school. But listen, pick that case up directly with us offline and we'll see if we can intervene.
Thank you. To the next member, Cathy.
Thanks, Chair. I just want to ask something slightly different topic, and that's around the youth funding programme that was mentioned in your brief, and this new programme board that's been established. And it's just really to see where, how far this has got or where it is at the minute. And it's just, I suppose, on the back of a lot of long-standing issues that we see in youth provision and youth services. And I know in my own area in particular, in the latest round of funding, there was nothing there for Newry Morning Down at all, which I just find mind-boggling when I think of the youth clubs and the youth services that are there and what they're providing. While we are talking about special educational needs, one in particular, they're having to do their own fundraising. They're asking parents and they're asking local sports clubs and different things to give them money to be able to put on a specific special educational needs group, because there's nothing else in the area for them, and it's something that's long standing and it's been running for a long time. But I'm just trying to figure out, or is there where is the rationale that there didn't seem to be any funding need in the Newry Morning Down area? And I know it's not just Newry Morning Down, I know there was other areas that were left out as well, but I suppose it's just to get a feel for that, and then this, what changes this new programme board is going to make.
Well, look, the purpose of the programme board is to provide confidence to the system broadly that EA is listening around what is required in terms of the provision for youth services. And look, we know that youth services predominantly volunteer based. 80% of youth provision is provided on a volunteer basis, but we know that EA provides some statutory services, and then obviously there's the community and voluntary sector that provide services as well. So the purpose of the programme is to be open and transparent in terms of how we allocate funding across the system. In terms of your piece about the Newry and Mourne Council area, again, and I believe, Chair, we have a dedicated session in a couple of weeks or next week about youth, and we can come back in more detail on that. But my understanding is, and again, I'll have to pick it up offline, is that each of the council, so there's a funding, so we have the allocation, that there's a criteria, and it's the department's criteria where that funding is spread across each of the 11 council areas. And then based on the local need, the regional and local need, and what the priorities for youth are, that funding is then allocated appropriately across those each council area. So I suppose I'm surprised that you're saying to me that Newry and Mourne haven't had any funding. So sorry, Chair, I'm going to have to come back on that particular issue. But I know we have a session and we can get into the detail of that at that time.
And just in terms of that programme board, where is it, or how long are we in a review, or when can we expect to find?
So the work plan, as I understand it, is to have a conclusion by the end of June, okay, in terms of the funding, and to look at what the arrangements might be moving into the future. But it's also linked into the department's review of the policy on youth provision as well, and there might be an impact of what the policy review indicates might have an impact on the funding.
Okay, thanks, Sharon.
Thank you for that. I just wanted to maybe finish with one final question. It was a question that I'd asked the department as well. We have focused on SEN. We're in a very difficult position at the moment. What can you give us in terms of an assurance that this time next year we won't be back having a conversation about a crisis in placements in SEN? What can be done to ensure that we are in a better place each time?
Well, firstly, I think we have a good handle on our planning assumptions in terms of what the additionality is going to look like moving forward. I mean, we are focused obviously on September 2024, but we are also working around on September 25 in terms of additional capacity and beyond that as well. So one of the key pieces of work we want to take forward is really the pathways for those pupils. As these young people enter the system, they're all going to come to a particular transition point, and we need to make sure then that the capacity and that their pathway is plotted out. So there is work ongoing on that, Chair, around that. I think we internally, EA has stood up a broader programme of work and diverted additional resource in there. We will continue to prioritise that, and I think we are better placed. However, I know that in the previous session, the department officials made the point that we need to do this together. So EA cannot provide absolute assurance that there won't be difficulties next year, because we really need our schools to work with us to put in place the provisions that are required with what is going to be a very different pupil profile moving forward and into the future. But we are committed, and we're working really closely with the department and colleagues there, and we want to continue to work with our schools as well to provide them with the relevant support.
Thank you. I think we'll be seeing a lot more of each other over the next few weeks. So
sounds like it.
Yeah. All right. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any actions arising, Claude?
Yeah, everyone, just as that's been our first contact with the EA, and nobody asked any hard questions of either. No, I think I don't have any proposed actions for just now. You've got 2 more briefing sessions in the coming weeks.
Any members?
Unless anyone else
any
does.
actions that we want to pick up from that session? I think we
I'll
covered
follow
a
up
lot of
separately,
it with the department, but no, I'm happy to move to next item. Okay. Well, we've covered item 7, which is correspondence earlier, so that just leaves us with the next item for the forward work programme. So there's an updated draft forward work programme at page 145 of your packs. So I would just ask the clerk maybe to speak to the forward work plan first of all, just in terms of where we're at with that, and then we can take it from there.
Okay. So members, the committee planned a lot of invites and things like that before Easter, and a lot of the responses only came in the last couple of days. So the tabled forward work plan has got a lot of new detail in it. So I'll just talk you through what we have. Now, this is in advance of the strategic planning session that I've been trying to marshal diary information for, and in relation to that, I'm proposing that the committee do that on the 1st of May in its meeting space, because that kind of affords everybody the best opportunity to attend. We mapped where everyone is coming from, constituency-wise, and we thought near Belfast was actually best. So there's an outstanding commitment in the legacy report to go to the Forest School, which is at Clandeboy, just down the road, and that is a possibility. So the team intends to go and do a recce next Tuesday, and that would allow the committee to take a short briefing from Forest School and then get into its strategic planning session within the Wednesday afternoon. So that's one.
Week commencing the 29th of April, is it that one, or is it the following week?
It is, yeah. It's the 1st of May, Wednesday the 1st of May. And then there is actually a long weekend after that, but the holiday isn't the 1st of May itself. So then we've got EA for the next 3 weeks, or today and the next 2 weeks, sorry, and they're paired with policy updates from the department in the first instance, and then the operational side of things coming from EA, and we're relevant where we can, a relevant stakeholder. So 17th of April, Unison have confirmed that they can come and talk about their free school meals campaign, and then we would have relevant officials from the department and the EA about free school meals and also uniforms and transport. Then on the 24th of April, again the EA about youth provision. But I mean, we have time if there are other things that come up in these briefings that you would also like EA to tell you about. We can let them know in advance. But so provisionally, we're thinking to have Youth Work Alliance and the uniformed youth groups as the relevant stakeholders for that meeting. You can see the informal meetings as well coming up in the blue column. So we have confirmation of NICICTU next Tuesday morning and the British Association for Counselling and Psychotherapy the following Tuesday. So then you can see 1st of May, strategic planning meeting at the Forest School, and that would give members an opportunity to consider what they feel their priorities are. You know, are there things that the committee should mainline on for the next few months? Maybe things that are kind of short-term, medium-term, long-term objectives. We're getting a lot of contacts from stakeholder groups wanting to come up and have an informal meeting. If we get too many of those, it may be that the committee wants to arrange a mechanism where you'll have a stakeholder roundtable event or something like that instead of the Tuesday morning option. So we'll do some modelling like that. Then and also RSE. So our researcher is going to come and present us a paper on RSE at the strategic planning meeting. I've also got a bit of an outline today of the timings that we might follow for the RSE mini inquiry, and also a paper to help us start to consider what the essential aspects of the inquiry will be for the committee. Okay, so then going into May, it would be we've agreed to have the Integrated Education Fund come in and also receive an oral update on the Integrated Education Act and Action Plan, because that's just been due within the terms of the Act, and it would be helpful to have the EA area planning briefing at that time as well, because those are quite interlinked issues. Sorry, my mouse isn't working very well here. And then the 15th of May, again, the Human Rights Commission, the Chief Commissioner can come on that date. And I think the Chair said earlier that an update on restraint and seclusion policy would be opposite. So I think in that space we could have health and education reps talking about the experience of that in various settings, and an update from the department on how that guidance is going. Kate?
Thank you. Just to add, if we could ask officials in relation to childcare to come as soon as possible. We were told before Easter that there would be an update on the task and finish group and what interim support was going to be made available. I don't think the department have responded to previous requests for a timeline for a childcare strategy, which we have asked.
Yeah.
And I don't think they were that clear on the task and finish group. So I think we were told there'd be an update after Easter. I'd like to see them soon if possible.
Okay, so would you like a written and an oral briefing on that?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Certainly chase the written briefing, but to have them here.
That's quite poor. They haven't responded to that.
That's great. And so
Can I just add, we were on restraint and seclusion there. I think there's plenty of informal slots free. I mean, I think there are lots of stakeholders in that space would want to inform our considerations on that. So I think there may be scope, if members are in agreement with that, to use some of those informal briefings, because it crosses health and education and on the rights-based issues. So there's a lot there for us to consider, and I really would not want it to be the case that statutory guidance lands without the committee having had a proper consideration in the round of all of the issues, if members are in agreement with that.
Yeah. I was going to say, just to propose people, the informal meeting allows you to have people who would otherwise, feel like it was too sensitive to talk about in public, because that's obviously not a broadcast meeting. So think about who the stakeholders would be for both formal and informal. Sorry, Pat.
And I suppose I just wanted to say, I mean, the committee has rightly prioritised the whole issue of special educational needs, and we're getting briefings from the department and from the EA and so on. I'm not sure we're hearing enough from parents who have been affected by this and stakeholder groups, and I'm sort of taken by Eileen's suggestion about a round table event, maybe.
About restraint and seclusion, particularly.
But I think the committee should be hearing direct experiences from parents and stakeholder groups.
Yeah, just to back that up, not just restraint and seclusion. Elma White, whose son Caleb goes to Harberton, has contacted some members. There was some press in the BBC about him fundraising for the therapy dog, and she's really interested in post-19 support. So I think there are lots of other areas that you're right, we haven't touched on, and I definitely support that. And the therapy dog.
So there are spaces then really in May for all of that.
That's also an area that, to be honest, Cheryl would know more. It's not an area that I'm overly familiar with, the restraint piece. So I'd be keen if we have a round table, and this is not because of any sort of viewpoint myself, but to have a spectrum, if there is a spectrum of views on that, to hear those discussions sort of openly about what concerns people have and why, just to have a greater understanding of it myself.
I think it's really important the committee is properly informed on that issue.
So the independent review panel has given us several dates when they're available, and it depends on how much they've obviously done an enormous amount of work. It's the most recent kind of research base really on a lot of education issues. Provisionally, we could have them there on the 22nd of May with updates from DE on the Emotional Health and Wellbeing Framework and potentially the Addressing Bullying in Schools Act. And then again on the 29th. Now the 29th is the day on which the Economy Committee is proposing the concurrent meeting. So you might want to meet at the Economy Committee's time of 10:30, and then come in here at 2 and just quickly do some correspondence and leave, or you might want to have your first, you might want to speak to the review panel that day. And then in those next couple of weeks, 5th of June, 12th of June, 19th of June, they're all, the panel is available. So you could take a thematic approach to those and put in childcare, put in whatever your priorities are.
My feeling would be is that I think it would be good to hear in a fair bit of detail from the review panel. I think we've very specific issue focus, which is good, but I think this might help us begin to get that overview of the system and where there's maybe a need for reform. But in terms of the number of sessions, do members have a view on how many we would need? I mean, I would be suggesting 3 as a minimum. possibly 4. But because I think if you try and give them an hour on their work, it would be, we wouldn't scratch the surface. But I'm happy to hear views on that, or that we can take that to our strategic planning session if more appropriate.
Yeah. Yeah, shall I provisionally book them for 4 sessions? Is that too much? Like on that 29th,
I guess it's easier to book them for that, and if you feel like you've covered enough in the 3, you can always, fill that extra slot rather than not cater for it and then be sort of stuck. So I think that makes sense personally.
Or if you want to take a steer from them, through yourself as a committee clerk, how many sessions they feel they need to actually cover their work. We don't want to overload it if unnecessarily. But
Come back to it then.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll say the deprivation issue that you've raised a couple of times, Deputy Chair, about the review panel. I think that's probably, you can nearly have a whole meeting just sussing out the various factors in that with them. Okay. So so we go up. I mean, they're in. Let me see. Recess is the last meeting before recess is the 3rd of July. So that's your main forward work plan, and then also in the table of papers is the timeline on RSE. Which, do you want to speak to that, Mark?
I think you've covered mostly anyway.
Okay.
What we're proposing is that the committee would consider the terms of reference and what sort of questions they want to ask at the strategic planning day, make a decision the following week, and then at that weekend we would issue a 6-week request for evidence. That would be finished on the 21st of June, and we would prepare some sort of briefing for members for their final meeting before recess on the 3rd of July to allow you to decide who you'd like to take evidence from once you come back following recess. So that's just the timetable we've set out there.
I think that looks like a good schedule. I had sort of initially proposed something being done over the summer, but I think it was rightly pointed out that you've got a lot of people on leave, and summertime is probably not the best time to be doing a call for evidence. So the sooner we can get that out, the better. So if members can just be ready on our strategic planning day with some ideas around the terms of reference, that would be helpful.
In terms of the terms of reference, the original impetus for the mini inquiry was the regs that came before the committee in its first or second week. So there was, on the one hand, the requirement to put into law comprehensive and scientifically accurate education on sexual and reproductive health and rights, covering early pregnancy prevention and access to abortion. And on the other hand, then there was a right to have an opt-out from that. And that was based on a consultation by the department. So that's kind of where the initial impetus was, but it may be that the committee wants to look more broadly at the issue of RSE. So that's what I would like a steer on from you. I mean, we can obviously have a comparative approach, hear from experts and read examples from other jurisdictions. There was a sense that the department hadn't consulted with a lot of young people in comparison to the adult respondents, so the committee might want to go into that youth engagement space and consult young people on both the topics of sexual and reproductive rights, but then perhaps the wider topics of consent that Lord Gillen advised should be in this part of the curriculum. And so the committee could review the list of topics in the curriculum, seek perspectives from the teaching unions and the inspectorate, maybe consider, like, would a weekly time allocation for this kind of education be useful, as there is for PE? And then, who teaches it? Is it provided uniformly? Should it be taught by external providers, or can teachers opt out? So there are a lot of issues like that members raised in the initial discussion. And some of the products then would be an assessment of stakeholder perspectives, an analysis of comparative best practice, and some of the outcomes and objectives might be recommendations, a report, a motion to the Assembly, a debate in the House, and potentially legislative changes to the curriculum minimum content order, and even possibly the Addressing Bullying in Schools Act as well. So that's, I mean, it could be a substantial piece of work.
I mean, I maybe foolishly building a mini inquiry, but I mean, my strong preference would be that we take as broad an approach as possible. I think if we just focus on the issues specifically related to that minimum content order, I think we will miss an opportunity, and I think we should be looking at something that really looks at how do we develop an appropriate RSE curriculum for Northern Ireland in its broadest terms. So that's right through from healthy relationships at the early stages through to all the other issues as you move through. That would certainly be my strong preference.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I obviously have very strong views on this, but I'm keen to hear the full spectrum of views as well. So I thought David was falling off his seat by me saying I'd like to hear other views that don't just align with mine. But yeah,
have to bring some salt.
Yeah, I think any discussions around it has to have as broad a discussion as possible in terms of the views that are reflected wherever we go. Ultimately, you're going to have that within the committee and in the chamber anyway. So it's important that we hear from as broad a part of the spectrum as possible.
Okay, great.
I think that's where we're well set up for the next number of weeks. That's great. Unless anyone has anything to add to that. No. So that then just takes us to item 9, which is any other business. I'll just reference it briefly. He's not here, but I would just wanted to put on record my thanks to Danny for attending the Youth Forum event on the 23rd of March on the committee's behalf, but we can maybe thank him in person when he's next here. Is there any other business from any other members? No. Okay, so that just brings us to item 10, date, time and place of next meeting, which is Wednesday the 17th of April, and that's 2 p.m, room 29. And at this stage, I will just put the question that the committee meeting does now adjourn. Members agreed? Thank you.
Committee room 29, sound. Committee room 29, sound.